from Greece to Karachi than it is within Karachi. So Dr. Nadeem Tharer will be joining us in a few minutes. But let me, for the benefit of the audience, say how impressed we are and delighted that
Ωραία, καλύτερα να μην μας βλέπουνε.
We lost you. We lost you.
Well,
όχι, δεν τον χάσαμε. Έβαλε ταινία για να μην βλέπουν εμάς.
Όχι.
I'm afraid Alexander was luckier with his guides than we are with technology. So he was able to at least find his way. But he'll come back in a moment. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, what is the plural noun for, collective noun, for doctors, for PhDs? Is there one? Can you have more than one?
Doctor.
Doctor.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean more than one, but all right. I think we're back. Anyway, you can hear me, can you?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, let me begin by welcoming you, as I've just said a little earlier. The audience is deeply impressed by the quality of scholarship that is available at this conference, and more so this morning through you too. Dr. Pelizeni, Adam Veleni, may I call you Polizeni or Polly for short, whatever's convenient for you?
Of course. You may call me Polixeni. I have a real Greek name.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, my name is Fakir Sayyid Ijazuddin, so that's 4 of them. I outnumber you by 1. But I'm known as Ijaz, so please, during the course of our interaction, please feel free to call me Ijaz. Dr. Polizeni has an honorary doctorate from the Sorbonne, and since 2018, she's held the most prestigious post that she can have in her country, and that is as the Director General of Antiquities in the Ministry of Culture and Sport. She has interests in the theater, literature, and painting, so she has a much wider horizon than many of the scholars that we are used to. She will be talking about Alexander the Great from Macedonia to Asia. So as you can see, it's a wide spectrum that she will be covering. For all those of you who are interested in her detailed CV, please get a copy of the brochure and you'll find them detailed there, and it's most impressive. Dr. Flora Karagiani, is that okay?
Flora.
Right, Flora.
Yes, Flora.
Yeah. She studied history and archaeology at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Now, you can't get purer than that, to be studying at a university named after Aristotle, who, of course, as we know, was the teacher of Alexander. In 2022, she curated a digital exhibition in New Delhi on Alexander, but the connection and her forte is Byzantine connections with the Hellenic tradition. She draws in her paper, in her discussion today, she'll be drawing upon an illustrated manuscript of the middle of the 5th, 14th century, which was found to derive from the personal library of the Byzantine Emperor Alexius III. She will be talking about Alexander's visit to the kingdom of Porus. And the last speaker who will be joining us will be Dr. Nadeem Tharer, and he is our own domestic. Aye. Nadeem Sahab? He'll be joining us, and he has a PhD in art history and a postdoctorate diploma degree. Aage? Aaiye Nadeem Sahab, come. मैं आप ही का जिक्र कर रहा हूँ, please. All right. Nadeem Sahab, ji, I was just giving you an introduction. There are 3 chairs here, all right, and you can choose any one you like. All right. I'm reminded of ICS officer who visited Petrus Bukhari Sahib. And Petrus Bukhari Sahib, this ladies, is an anecdote relating to our, one of our leading bureaucrats in his day. He belonged to what was, he was the Director General of All India Radio. And a bureaucrat came to see him. And the bureaucrat stood and he introduced himself. He said, I'm Mr. Chatterjee. So without looking up, Petrus Bukhari said, well, take a seat. At which the man affronted said, I don't think you understand. I am Mr. Chatterjee in Indian Civil Service, which is the highest ranking that we have. In which case, Petrus Bukhari said, take 2 seats. So, Dr. Tarar, please take any one of the 2 seats that is available. Dr. Tarar, as I mentioned, has specialized in Gandharan history, and he holds currently, appropriately, the Gandharan chair at the University of Bath. His talk will be after Alexander came, and it focuses on beyond Hellenism in Gandharan art. So may I begin, Polizeni, with you, if you'd be kind enough to kick off. And your paper,
yes.
You would like to talk about Alexander the Great, from Macedonia to Asia, the vision of the Greek king who changed the world. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. President, honorable members of the conference and distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to address my good morning to you. It's very early here in Greece. And secondly, my warm thanks for your invitation to participate in your conference. Unfortunately, an official commitment we had at the Ministry of Culture did not allow us to be physically present in your beautiful country, but we are now in a time when technology can overcome the barriers of borders. I hope we can meet in the near future on a trip to Greece, where you can visit all the archaeological sites related to Alexander the Great here in Greece, in Macedonia, in northern Greece. So will you permit me now to share my screen with you? Will you permit me to share my PowerPoint with you? You should permit me.
Yeah, will you? Somebody has to give permission to share.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. We're doing it for you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Dr. Polizeni, we can never refuse
yes?
the Greek. We can never refuse the Greeks anything. So we'll give you permission just now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We couldn't Alexander, and we won't refuse you. True. While they're connecting, what is the weather like in Athens? In
beautiful.
Greece?
It's 20 degrees. It's
nice.
Very warm.
Okay. Well,
how is the weather there in Karachi?
It's perfect. It's the kind of weather that where we invite scholars to come, because it's the only weather that they can really see the city. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Our political climate isn't too hot. It's becoming hotter, but otherwise, meteorologically, we're fine. I think we're just going to share the screen with you. Yeah.
Is it possible now?
Yes, I think so. They're going to press the right button, and you can share. There you are. Message is being typed for you. Okay?
Just a minute. Share
screen? Yeah. I think you started share screening.
Yes, just a minute to find my, here it is. Well,
There we are. Brilliant.
here we are. Okay. So,
Perfect. Please start. Yeah.
so the Kingdom of Macedonia was the north part of the mainland of Greece. During geometric times, it was limited to a small area in Imathia. It's the dark brown in the map. Gradually, however, and after a series of worthy kings, it began to spread to the surrounding lands. After the establishment of the Aegean royal house in ancient Macedonia by King Perdiccas I in the middle of the 7th century BC, followed by a series of important kings who raised the kingdom to a significant power in the northern Greek area. Thanks to financial self-sufficiency, guaranteed by its rich sources of wealth, cattle, forests, mines, and its geographical isolation, the Macedonians, one of the many Greek tribal kingdoms of the geometric period, remained outside the socio-political changes that took place in the great commercial centers of the south and conservation until the end of the classical era, their archaic structures and traditions that reflected a society typical to the epic, while in Athens, in other city-states, democracy was established and strengthened. The Kingdom of Macedonia acquired its greatest extent in the years of Philip II, who extended his rule from the regions of Illyria and Epirus in the west to Thrace to the east. Philip II of Macedon, who ruled from 359 to 336 BC, is known for transforming the Kingdom of Macedon from the relatively weak and disorganized state into a powerful and centralized kingdom that could eventually conquer much of Greece. Philip II accomplished this through a series of military, political, and administrative reforms. One of the key military reforms that Philip II instituted was the creation of a standing professional army known as the Macedonian Phalanx that was well trained and well equipped. He also introduced new tactics and weapons, such as the sarissa, a long spear, which gave his army a significant advantage over other Greek armies. Prior to Philip II, the Macedonian army was made up of farmers who were called to fight only during times of war. To protect his borders, Philip II employed a well-trained and well-equipped army that was organized into a professional fighting force. He also created a network of fortresses along the frontiers of his kingdom, which served as garrisons for its troops and as strategic points from which to launch offensive actions against his enemies. Additionally, he established diplomatic relations with neighboring states, which helped to secure peace and prevent conflicts along his borders and create a network of friendly states around Macedonia. He used also marriages and other diplomatic means to secure the loyalty of neighboring states and to isolate his enemies. Philip II also made a number of political reforms that helped to centralize power in the kingdom. He also created a powerful bureaucracy to manage the kingdom's finances and oversee its resources. This helped to ensure that the various regions of the kingdom were controlled by loyal officials who could be held accountable to the central government. Recent excavations in Macedonia revealed a significant number of huge farms, show that from the time of his reign, a drastic change took place in the economy, trade, and land management. In terms of land distribution, Philip II granted land to his loyal followers as a way to reward them for their service and to secure their loyalty. Philip favored the upper classes of the Macedonian aristocrats, the partners, and distributed them land, thus achieved a dual purpose. On the one hand, he exploited natural resources, and on the other, he supervised through his devoted partners the areas of his kingdom. This type of land management could be described as a primitive feudal system based a new concept of land management in line with the new requirements of a more unified world. In various areas of central Macedonia, a significant number of rural complexes were excavated, while the archaeological map is constantly enriched with new sites. This set of farmhouses gives important information both about their organization and location and about their functions. Another significant administrative reform that Philip II implemented was the reorganization of the Macedonian economy. He encouraged the growth of trade and commerce, which helped to boost the kingdom's economy and make it more self-sufficient. He also created a system of taxation that was more efficient and fair, which helped to ensure that the government had a steady stream of income. Philip II also founded new cities and settlements on newly acquired territories, which he populated with settlers from other parts of Greece. He offered these settlers land and other incentives to relocate into the new territories, which helped to secure Macedonian control over these areas and establish a loyal base of supporters. He reorganized also the old capital of the kingdom, building a huge palace, a theater, and he reformed the agora of the city, and he created another huge palace and agora in the new capital of his kingdom, Pella, a city nearby the sea, where Alexander was born and raised. Philip II's reforms had a profound impact of the Kingdom of Macedon, helped to establish Macedon as a major power in the ancient world, in the Greek world, and contributed greatly to enabling his young successor, Alexander, at the age of only 20, to continue his goal of campaigning in the east to avenge the Persians. Alexander became king of Macedonia in 336 after the assassination of his father, King Philip, during his daughter marriage ceremony in the theater of Aegies. He was only 20 years old, but he was raised by his father to be a real descendant of Hercules and of his mother, the Illyrian princess Olympias, to be a king, and from his teacher, Aristoteles, to be a philosopher. In addition, he inherited a powerful kingdom, a strong army, which he used to expand his empire, ultimately conquering most of the known world of his time, from Greece to Egypt and to India. Alexander's campaign began in 334, when he crossed the Hellespont, now the Dardanelles, with the army of 40,000 soldiers and headed for the Persian Empire. After his conquest of Egypt, Alexander continued his campaign into the heart of the Persian Empire, eventually reaching the city of Babylon, which he made his capital. It was here that he died in 323, leaving his empire to be divided among his generals. He defeated the Persian forces in the series of battles, including the battles of Issos and Gardamila, and went on to conquer the Persian capital of Persepolis in 330. After consolidating his control over the Persian Empire, Alexander turned his attention to the eastern regions of the Indian subcontinent. He led his army across the Hindu Kush mountains and into what is now Afghanistan and northern India. In 326, he defeated the Indian king Porus in the Battle of Hydaspes and established a foothold in the region. After his conquest of Persia, Alexander continued eastward, expanding his empire into present-day Pakistan and India. He defeated the Indian king Porus in the battle, and Alexander died in Babylon, as we said before, in 323, leaving behind him an enormous empire that strengthened from Greece to India. Alexander the Great achieved social and cultural unification of his vast state by promoting Greek culture, which was a blend of Greek and Eastern culture. Some of the ways that he achieves this unification, it's first of all, Alexander promoted Greek culture throughout his empire by establishing Greek styles cities, promoting the use of Greek language, and encouraging the adoption of Greek customs and traditions. He considered himself a successor to a great Greek heroes of the past, and believed that his conquests were a continuation of the Greek tradition of expanding their civilization. Alexander encouraged his officers to marry local women, which helped to promote cultural exchange and intermarriage between Greeks and local people. These marriages also helped to create alliances between different groups and ensure loyalty to Alexander's empire. Alexander also practiced religious tolerance and allowed the people in his empire to worship the gods of their own choosing. This helped to foster a sense of unity and respect for diverse cultural practices. Also, he founded a library in Alexandria, the city that he founded, among the other 46 that he founded in this vast area, which was a center of learning and scholarship. The library collected and preserved books from all over the Asian world, which helped to promote the spread of knowledge and ideas.
Dr. Polizeni, we have 5 more minutes. We have 5 more minutes for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alexander recorded trade throughout his empire, which helped to facilitate the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. The coinage of Alexander was minted during his reign and was produced in large quantities and distributed throughout his empire. The design of Alexander's coins were highly symbolic and often conveyed his political and religious ideals. For example, many of the coins feature the image of god Heracles, who was Alexander's personal hero and served as a symbol of his own strength and military prowess. Other coins feature images of Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, who conveyed Alexander's desire to incorporate Greek culture and the tradition into his empire. One of the most interesting features of Alexander coins is the use of portraiture. Prior to Alexander, Greek coinage typically featured stylized images of gods and goddesses rather than realistic portraits and individuals. And Alexander, however, broke with tradition and included his own portraits on his coins, which helped to establish a new tradition of coinage featuring the likeness of rulers. Alexander's the Great's coinage is considered to be some of the most influential in the Asian world. With the spread of his coinage, the commercial unification of the world became possible. His currency for centuries was considered the most stable means of transactions, and many Hellenistic rulers imitated it. The Greek language spread throughout Alexander's empire. The regions as deep as Asia could remain Greek-speaking for many centuries until the arrival of the Arabs. The first globalized society was established. His legacy continued after his death as the Hellenistic culture spread and influenced many cultures throughout the Asian world. The Indo-Greek kingdom was created after Alexander's death, as his empire was divided among his generals known as the Diadochi. One of these generals, Seleucus I Nicanor, gained control of the eastern portion of Alexander's empire, which included much of present-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. He founded the Seleucid Empire and appointed a governor named Sandrodocus to rule over the Indian territories. Seleucus established a dynasty that ruled the region for several centuries, blending Greek and Indian cultures and promoting Hellenistic art and architecture. The Indo-Greek kingdom became a center of trade and commerce, with its rulers minting coins and engaging in diplomatic relations with neighboring powerful tribes. The descendants of Seleucus, however, continued to rule over a smaller portion of the Indian subcontinent, centered around the region of Bactria, which had a significant Greek-speaking population. This became known as the Indo-Greek kingdom, which lasted from around 180 BC to 10 BC. The Indo-Greek kings adopted a blend of Greek and Indian cultures and religion, and their legacy can still be seen in the art and architecture of the region. The Indo-Greek kingdom was created when the Greco-Bactrian king Demetrius invaded and conquered northeastern India in the 2nd century BC. The kingdom was characterized by a fusion of Greek and Indian culture, and it produced a rich body of art and literature. The Indo-Greek kings were able to maintain their power for several centuries, but eventually the kingdom declined due to internal strife and external pressure from neighboring kingdoms. One of the primary ways in which Greek culture influenced the Asian one was through the spread of Hellenistic art and architecture. This blending of Greek and Asian styles led to the creation of a new innovative forms, such as Greco-Buddhist and art of Gandhara, which combined Greek artist techniques with Buddhist themes. In addition to art and architecture, Greek culture also influenced literature, science, and philosophy in the Hellenistic kingdoms. Greek ideas also about democracy, philosophy, and science were adopted and adapted by the people of the conquered territories, leading to the development of new schools of thought and innovative intellectual movements. As a result of Alexander's conquest, a number of Hellenic kingdoms were established in the regions that he conquered. These kingdoms were generally ruled by Greek-speaking elites and were characterized by the blending of Greek and Asian cultures. Summing up, we could say that Alexander is undoubtedly the greatest leader of all time, not only for the first huge world empire he created, in which all the conquered peoples could have a place, not only for the spread and mixing of Greek culture with the Asian, but mainly because he did something that no leader so far has dared to do. He married his enemy's daughter and made his hair with hair. Thus, he not only did not humiliate his enemy, but instead honored him by making the daughter of his enemy his queen. To understand the magnitude of this greatness, it is enough to make a comparison with today. It is as if the former president of US married the daughter of Saddam Hussein, Trump married the daughter of Saddam Hussein, or if the son of Biden married the daughter of Putin. It seems unimaginable to us. And yet Alexander, with every honor, put Roxani on his side, who also gave him his son and successor, Alexander IV. Alexander the Great envisioned a unified, peaceful world with common cultural elements, without discrimination, without exclusion, and he achieved it. If he had not been overtaken by his untimely death at the age of just 33, it is certain that our world would have been totally different. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Polizina. Thank you. It was a magnificent survey of Greek culture and its contribution, particularly to our part of the subcontinent. You dealt with the farmhouses, for example, the personal lives of the Greeks, and then the use of coins in the economy. You also talked about the capital that was established, the new capital of Pella, and then marriages that he achieved. And I think it's a wonderful reference that you've made about the Americans marrying Saddam Hussein's daughters. It brings it all in a topical sense. If it's any consolation to you, most of the people in the audience have, by the way, married local women. So we followed Alexander's tradition. You also concluded by talking about porous, and so this leads us directly into the next speaker's presentation, and that is by Dr. Flora Kargiani, and she will be talking about Alexander's visit, if one could call it that, a confrontation with Porus, whom we now laud as the Indian or subcontinental adversary to Alexander. Please, could you start? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much for your invitation to participate in this very interesting conference on Alexander the Great. I congratulate you for the fact that you brought there in Karachi the best of the experts on Alexander. We wish we could be there with Dr. Veleni, but as she said, we are committed to a meeting in our ministry. I'm happy for this, both because I'm a Greek archaeologist working in the Hellenic Ministry of Culture, but besides this, I am originated from these places of Alexander. I come from Veria, which is the city between Pella and Aegeus, next to the school of Aristotle. So I'm very much familiar from my childhood with Alexander. Well, as you said previously, I am a Byzantinist, and I'm going there today to give you an idea of how the medieval world really saw Alexander and contributed to transferring his legend to our era. So, when in 336, hold on, okay. In 336, Alexander, a 20-year-old boy, was proclaimed King of Macedonia after the assassination of his father Philip in Aegae, in modern Vergina, in central Macedonia. Nobody would imagine that he could become the ruler of Ikoumeni. His campaign, that started immediately after, lasted 13 years and included, as we all know, hundreds of battles in which he succeeded to conquer most of the well-known by that time world, reaching as far as India and covering areas that correspond to over 26 countries of today's European, African, and Asian continents. His invisible military campaign and his victorious battles resulted in the formation of one of the greatest empires of the ancient world by Alexander, with him becoming one of the most successful commanders in world military history and one of the most famous historical figures who became the topic of in all kinds of art, from cinema to theater, even to shadow theater, or to paintings, of course, to visual arts, or even music. Undoubtedly, his death in Babylon in the summer of 323 marked the end of an era, since everything he achieved in his almost 13 years campaign, the conquest of dozens of nations, his exclusive victories that led him to the ends of the ecumeny, decisively influenced the evolution of world history. In the course of time, Alexander became a legend in his own lifetime, since wherever he went, he respected the local cultures he conquered. In the cities he founded, he built temples in order to honor their gods, offered sacrifices in their sanctuaries, honored them and was honored by them more than anyone ever had. His contribution in several fields, including economy and culture, was unprecedented. In a vast area extended as far as the depths of the East, he opened trade and transport routes, as Dr. Veleni also said, that introduced the Hellenistic spirit, sciences, and culture into the ends of the ecumeny. Predictably, the death of Alexander, although premature, did not throw into oblivion this great Greek commander. On the contrary, his bravery and valor in battles, his intelligence, his almost supernatural abilities, his colossal contribution to the spread of Greek civilization, his conquest and his interaction with so many nations were so impressive that in the centuries that followed, he became a legendary figure and he found his own position to the medieval world as well. One of the things that became source of admiration in his era, but also in the centuries that followed, and especially in the medieval world, was the distant places that he reached with his army. This has been developed as one of the most challenging parameters of his campaign, and it had been extremely loved by the medieval world in the East and West. I remind you that in the medieval manuscripts, like the Byzantine Codex that you made reference, Mr. President, Codex 5 of Venice, dated on the 14th century, he has discussed a lot of his encounter with the unknown remote places inhabited by tribes and strange hostile creatures, such as people with 6 arms and 6 legs, canine heads, huge ants that ate humans and horses, giant crabs, birds with human heads, 6-legged creatures that, with 3 or 5 eyes, and legendary, of course, creatures of Greek mythology like centaurs and onagers. As it is known, the purpose, and not only, of course, in the Byzantine manuscripts, but also you see here an Islamic manuscript presented Alexander fighting with a dragon. As it is known, the purpose of Alexander's huge campaign was the conquest of the Persian Empire. When this was realized with the death of Darius III in the summer of 330, theoretically his mission to conquer Asia could be considered completed and successful, of course. But history proved that his internal desire, his wider vision, his pathos, as the speakers yesterday mentioned, his pathos was to explore the whole world, and as Byzantines believed and showed in the art, Alexander's desire was to go further, to discover and conquer both the earth and the sky. I make a parenthesis here, and I will remind you that in one of the most famous and the most favorite topics in Byzantine and medieval art, in Christian art, was the presentation of Alexander's miraculous ascent to heaven, known as Alexander's Ascension, which, like his equally fantastic descent to the depths of the sea, attests Alexander's overwhelming aspiration to explore not only the earth, but also the sky and the sea. As a result, the accession of Alexander to the heaven is of particular interest as it is much loved and quite common in almost all types of Byzantine art. Alexander is portrayed as a Byzantine emperor wearing a crown, standing on a chariot pulled by two giant carnivorous vultures, griffins. The hungry winged animals carry the chariot while trying to eat the bait and at the end of the sticks held by Alexander. We have so many examples of these depictions, not only in ivory, as you saw, they are dated of the 10th century, but also in this very famous diadem from the National Museum of Kiev, or the very famous marble plaque incorporated in the walls of in the surface of St. Mark's in Venice, dated from the 10th century. You can see here a detail of this description, which is, as I said, the Christian version of Alexander's Pothos, reaching the heaven and the sea. Numerous depictions, I just present you some over here. Even in the Christian monasteries of Mount Athos, we have many depictions in marble art. In enamels, the very famous in Victoria and Albert Museum in London, enamel of the 12th century, and even, of course, in frescoes, as you see here in Cappella Palatino in Palermo. As attested in the sources, in spring 326 BC, Alexander began his descent into the plain of Indus. The narration of the campaign by Arrian focuses on the battle that took place in one of the tributaries of Indus, the Hydaspes, in which Alexander defeated the Indian king of Porus with his army of 200 elephants. In the Battle of Hydaspes, the Indians, according to Arrian, lost 20,000 foot soldiers and 3,000 horsemen. All the chariots were broken to pieces. The sons of Porus died, as well as his brother Spitakis, and all the surviving elephants were captured. The greatest distress for Alexander, though, was that his horse Bucephalas died worn out, according to Arrian, by old age. Porus surrendered, and Alexander celebrated his victory with sacrifices and the foundation of the two cities, Nicaea, which means victory, and Bucephala, in the memory of his horse Bucephalas. The encounter of Alexander with Porus's army of elephants has been depicted in ancient coinage in the area of Babylon, with the famous Porus coins produced in 323 BC in Babylon, but it also has been the subject of medieval illumination as well. As it is known, the oldest records about the life of Alexander the Great dates back to the second half of the 1st century AD, and are found in the works of Plutarch and in some smaller literary works that survive in fragmentary form, such as the Diodorus Siculus, Curtius Rufus, Pompeius Trogus. The famous Arrian's Anabasis of Alexander, which tells the story of Alexander's campaign first in Macedonia and then in Asia, was written in the second half of the 2nd century AD, and since then, and especially since the end of the 3rd century AD, different versions of Alexander's romance were released, mainly the one written at the end of the 3rd century AD in Alexandria, Egypt. It was based on the story attributed to historian Callisthenes, who accompanied the Macedonian commander on his campaign, and after his death, wrote the account of his life. The version of the 3rd century AD was attributed to Pseudo-Callisthenes and describes the incredible exploits of the great conqueror and explorer of Ecumene. Over the centuries that followed, the version of Pseudo-Callisthenes was enriched with many fictional elements, and it enjoyed great popularity and was widely translated into many languages, Latin, Armenian, Syrian, Coptic, Serbian, English, German, Hebrew, etc. Among the earliest adaptations of Alexander's romance to appear in print was Hartlieb's Alexander book. 9 editions of this German translation are known to have appeared in the 15th century between 1473 and 1514 in Augsburg and Strasbourg. John Hartlieb was a physician who wrote the Alexander book around 1444 for his patron Duke Albrecht of III of Bavaria. Hartlieb's text circulated in manuscript for 3 decades until Johann Bamir issued the first printed edition in Augsburg in 1473. In this edition, among other woodcuts, one can see the 2 armies facing one the other. Porus's elephants to the left and Alexander's soldiers with their armor to the right. Moments of this fight are included also in the Serbian Alexander romance that was written in Slavonic in the 14th century. In these 2 folios of the manuscript, one can see the elephants of Porus depicted in a naive, of course, way, like horses with an addition of proboscis, trunks, in front of the gates of a castle with warriors defending it against Alexander's army. A slightly different version of the battle is given in the famous Book of the Kings, Shahnameh, of Firdausi, originated from India in 1616. In this folio of the manuscript 5600 of the British Library, the battle is depicted following the narration according to which Alexander heard about Porus's elephants from spies. In response, he recruited more than 1,200 blacksmiths to create 1,000 iron horses and riders on wheels, and he filled them with black oil. When Porus's elephants saw the flames in the heads of the horses, they ran, and as they were wrapping their trunks to the burning horses, they became maddened by their wounds. The following day, Iskandar challenged Fur, that is Porus, to a single combat in which he won. Following the iconography of the medieval manuscripts, we could argue that the medieval world, in contrast with the ancient one, if we could say that, when it comes to Alexander's visit to India, focuses on details that promote the ethos of the Greek general, his respect to the enemy. He respected both Darius and Porus, and mainly his philosophical pursuits. Let's not forget that Alexander in his huge campaign was accompanied not only by soldiers, but also by physicians, philosophers, astronomers, architects, historians, etc. Under such a reality, a big part of the medieval iconography focuses on the encounters of Alexander with philosophers and his visit to sacred places in India. Within this framework, it is of special interest the version of Codex 5, the most extensive and richly illustrated surviving copy of Alexander romance under the title An Excellent and Truly Wonderful Account About the Ruler of the World, Alexander the King. That was commissioned for the young Byzantine Emperor Alexios III of Trebizond. We are in the second half of the 14th century, to be prepared for his personal library, and today it is kept in the Hellenic Institute of Byzantine and Post-Byzantine Studies in Venice. In fact, this manuscript has been displayed in this marvelous exhibition in the British Library, in which let me congratulate Professor Stoneman for his editing of the catalogue of the exhibition. It has been among the most beautiful exhibitions that I have ever seen on Alexander's legend.
Dr. Flora,
So
we have 4 minutes left.
Yes.
Sorry, we have Dr.
Okay.
Flora, we have 4 minutes
Yes,
left.
yes.
So if you could run through the slides
Okay.
quickly, thank you.
So in this manuscript, as you can see, there are pages with illuminations narrating Alexander's entering to Porus's land. You can see here how he is depicted. The main one has to do with, it is in this folio in which the Indian leaders give an oracle that Alexander will conquest a lot of other cities and kingdoms. And then we have these other illuminations illustrating these facts in which, upon his meeting with them, Alexander asks also the naked philosophers, which is another very interesting issue of that is included in the manuscript. His meeting with the naked philosophers. He meets them. Upon his meeting, Alexander asks the naked philosophers if they have graves and who governs them, and they answer Ganthamis. Alexander then sends to Ganthamis on his treatise, here we are, on his treatise to settle the details of their encounter. Ganthamis says that he is not going to meet Alexander, but if Alexander wishes to come, Ganthamis will welcome him. Alexander then goes to meet Ganthamis, followed by his soldiers. He offers to the leader of the naked philosophers gifts, gold, silver, clothes, bread, and oil, but Ganthamis refuses to accept them. And then Alexander, and this is something that I would like to stress out, was impressed by them. Ethaumas and Sfodra, says the text, takes back his gifts, the oil, and returns, except of the oil, and returns to his army and narrates them to his soldier. The same story, more or less, is included also in these Indian, manuscripts. And another, the last one dimension of Alexander's encounter with the Indian world or the medieval manuscripts is his visit to the temple of Sun and Moon. In this Greek version of Codex 5, this is a very interesting event. Alexander visits this, this temple. The priests inform him that in order to receive the oracle, he should enter to the temple unarmed, because such an action would not fit to the sanctity of the place. Alexander leaves the arms, enters the table, and puts his hand on the trees. Then, after the sunset, the trees give an oracle in Indian language that nobody wanted to translate. And this is an indication, I refer to yesterday's discussion, that he had translators. The answer came during the sunrise, when he heard a voice coming from the interior of the table that his life was over. So, what one could conclude from the above-mentioned illuminations is the admiration of the medieval world in Alexander's achievement that took legendary dimensions and was combined with an effort to promote a general who was not just only a military figure who succeeded to conquer many countries, but mainly a personality who had metaphysical pursuits, who was himself captured by his own desire to explore the world, the ecumeny, who always respected the different civilizations and religions that he met, and therefore he was firstly respected by those who won the battles and were supposed to be his enemies. I will end this presentation with just a small comment that is one of my favorite scenes in Alexander's life. According to the narration, Porus, injured in the battle and exhausted from his wounds and his thirsty, dismounted from the elephant and surrendered. He asked for and drank water, and then he presented himself before Alexander, who was much impressed by his appearance. The text said that Porus was very tall, and above all, his courage and bravery. So he asked Porus how he wanted to be treated. And he said Vasilikos in Greek, meaning like a king. And then Alexander asked him if he wanted to add anything else, and Porus replied, Panda esti endo Vasilikos, that means everything is included in this world, like a king. After this, Alexander the Great was pleased and told Porus that he could continue governing his kingdom. And later, Porus added new areas under his jurisdiction. If from the whole narration of Alexander's life we only knew about his generosity with Porus and his decision to restore him to his kingdom, we would again be in the position to speak about a great man who fully respected the others and their culture and contributed to the meeting and interaction between different cultures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Flora. It was a fascinating presentation that you made, and particularly when you've dealt with the medieval manuscript, which very few of us will have the opportunity of seeing, but those who did visit the British Library would have had an opportunity of sharing it. You mentioned about
Let me tell you one detail.
Yes.
We have just published the facsimile of the manuscript, which is a very, very important edition, so you will be able to see the whole manuscript in the future.
Wonderful. And you've also mentioned about the strange animals and representations that were made of
Yes.
the people or the demons and adversaries that Alexander had encountered. Now, many years ago, I was asked by the BBC if I could speak on the future of the Commonwealth. And I asked them, how much time do I have? And they said, 4 minutes. So I said, well, that just about sums up the future of the Commonwealth, doesn't it? Now, the Hellenic Empire, of course, has gone way beyond those 4 minutes. And I think that it will certainly outlast what was the impact of the British Empire on this part of the world. We are proud of the Hellenic tradition that has been left by Alexander, and in order to further our knowledge of it, I'm going to invite our own local scholar, Dr. Nadeem Tarar, who, as I mentioned earlier, occupies the Gandharan chair at the University of Wa, which is, of course, adjacent to the old University of Taxila. So may I ask Dr. Nadeem to come forward? Thank you.
While my presentation is being uploaded, I would, take this moment to thank EFT and especially Hamid Ahund Saab for giving me the opportunity to be part of this growing community of scholars who are exploring, these areas which have never been touched upon. So I think it is my great pleasure and a true honor to be in Karachi talking to this illustrious audience, and especially scholars on Alexander whom one has only read in books. One is able to interact with them and see them live. So my presentation is very rightly placed in a way that our two worthy speakers from Greece have highlighted the contribution, the legacy of Alexander the Great, right? Fair enough, I mean, he must have been a benevolent man and a great warrior, and also, somebody who laid the foundation of a great Hellenic tradition that still kind of lives on in many ways in part of the areas which was ruled by Alexander. Can you please run it? Hold it. I would be talking about a particular icon in Gandhara sculpture, right? But I also thought that just to give a very quick intro as to what is Gandhara. This is a region which is located presently in northwestern Pakistan in Peshawar, Swat. Excuse me. Sorry. So what I was saying is that Gandhara is an ancient kingdom which was spread over these Swat and Peshawar valleys, and as well as Greater Gandhara would also include Pothar Plateau and especially Texla. So there were three great centers of Gandhara kingdom, the capital cities like Peshawar, Swat, and Texla, and they were called Pushkar, Kalavati, and Purushpura, and finally Takshashila. So, and the most of this Hellenic influence in today's Pakistani culture is dominant in Gandhara art, right? So Gandhara art is something which has been seen by the contemporary scholars and also 19th century Orientalists as carrying the strongest footprint of Hellenic culture, Hellenic aesthetics, Hellenic icons. So it has been really a prized art form, if you like, within our ancient history. Gandhara is something which is considered, thank you very much. Now I'm much in control, and I have my 20 minutes starting now. Right, and please do let me know when I have a little time left. Now, before I spring to the topic, I just want to tell you that this particular paper is an extension of my, earlier interest in the colonial art education, and you would know that the National College of Arts has the greatest sort of archival sources on writing art history, which I was a part of establishment in the 1990s, and I ended up writing this book recently, which actually, explains the colonial sociology that led to the kind of art that we have today, right? So my sort of current interest in the Orientalism around Gandhara, springs from my interest in Orientalism and art education in Punjab. Now, this is Gandhara region, as you could quickly see. Now, Gandhara was one of the 16 Mahajanpadas, the great sort of provinces in ancient India. It was colonized by Achaemenian in 600 BC. And Gandhara was also part of the Silk Route. The Silk Route was brought, people and ideas together. So Gandhara became like a melting pot of cultures. And this is like a chronology of the successive dynasties that have ruled here, from the Achaemenian down to Hindu Shai. You see, and all these cities that I mentioned were the ones which remained capital cities. Right, these are the Jataka tales. Those of you who are familiar with Buddhism would understand that the Jataka tales cite Gandhara. Jataka tales cite Texla University as a place where, the leading princes and, all secular, the seeker of the secular knowledge will come to Texla, not just Buddhism. And finally, this is the topic here, that I would like to kind of dwell on. Now, it is almost undeniable that the expedition of Alexander the Great and the widely established Alexandria city throughout the East Asia fostered the cultural interaction, exchange, integration, innovation in South Asia, Central Asia. It is undeniable, right? And you must also would know that since the 19th century, there was a great deal of interest in the regions which were ruled by Alexander. So there were scholars in the 19th century who were really amazed at the ancient history and also the ancient travelers who've been to these places like Chinese or, earlier on Roman visitors who were really surprised by finding, for instance, the Greek footprint in Texela. Apollonius of Tyrrhena, a first century traveler, reported that Texela king knew Greek and practiced javelin tossing after the manner of Greeks. So Greek footprint was everywhere in Gandhari language and everything else. And now what happens? For the colonial officials in the 19th century, Gandhara sculpture with recognizable Greek and Roman form represented the superiority of Western forms of representation. That's my first point. Now, this particular form of art was considered as superior to the other forms of Indian art, which were, part of our history and legacy. And why? Because of its connection with the West, with the Greece. And it was almost implied that as if, British people in the 19th century were here to reform us, to educate us. It was a process that has had an earlier history, a prehistory, if you like, in the form of Greek invading, Gandhara and civilizing. And you see this human realistic sculpture, which is a hallmark of Gandhara sculpture, is something that was showcased. Now, as you would know, there were people like Winston Smith, just one example, because there are loads of people like James Ferguson, the architectural historian, who said things similar to what Winston Smith is saying. I'm just giving a quote. And he's saying that Europe was practically ignorant of India until the waves were lifted by Alexander's operations. He saw the influence more widely on literature, drama, science, philosophy, and also highlighted the role of Romans. And he says, I have no doubts that Gandhara sculptures were copied from Greco-Roman and not pure Greek mold. Now the word to understand is copied. So what I'm saying is, 19th century Orientalists and Indologists, having looked at the Gandhara art, they said that, for instance, one of the greatest men, as I said, I'm quoting very, very selectively in the economy of time, John Marshall, the man responsible for the excavation of Indus Valley here in Sindh, and also responsible for the excavation in Texela for over 20 years. He says, nevertheless, in spite of wide diffusion, Hellenistic art never took the real hold upon India that it took, for example, upon Italy or Western Asia, for reasons that the temperament of the two people were radically dissimilar. These Greek ideals awakened no response in the Indian mind. And they further say that the Indian art deteriorated as it sort of moved further down in time from the Greek period. So Greek period was a flashpoint of enlightenment in ancient history. And the moment it was over, a couple of centuries later, that veil of darkness was, prevailing on India ever again. And until the great sort of British, colonialists came and took it out of the dark caves, as probably Aristotle would say. Now, this is about the colonialism, and I can understand why colonial would be so sort of rude to us in a way, or they were here to try to control us, so no hurt. Now think about the scholars, the academic community. One of the greatest scholars on Gandhara art is a French Orientalist called Alfred Fouché. And I'm sure some of you must have heard him. Now what he says, Fouché saw Gandhara art as a product of the father and the mother, the Indian mind and the Greek genius. India held the religious zeal, but not the intellectual capability of creating a human Buddha form. Now, this is my second point, that so far we have been told by scholars that for the very first time in Gandhara, the image of Buddha was given human form. Buddha was not represented in human form, as they say, but based on the scholarly sort of references, I do question it, right? But it was clearly said that because Greeks love to, love their deities to be given human form, So it was very much expected that when they ruled Gandhara, so they did to Buddha what they had done to Apollo for that matter, right? So I think this is one particular argument which is very, very persuasive and of course had a lot of merit into it. But there are other, there are other perspectives. Somebody like E.B. Howell, somebody who was in charge of Calcutta Art School, and another guy, Ananda Kumaraswamy. Now, Kumaraswamy is a philosopher of Indian art and a great sort of a man of his time. He disputed this European perspective on Gandhara art, and he said that there is no real injunction within Buddhism in giving Buddha a human form. So Buddha was actually portrayed not in stone, but in wood. And wood is a perishable material. So there's no archaeological evidence to prove. The only archaeological evidence that we have is a stone sculpture, and which comes when the Greeks were here. So it has been erroneously assumed that the Greeks were the one, or the Hellenic influence is responsible for the anthropomorphic representation of Buddha. And there are then there are other sort of arguments that he was able to put forward. Now, and mind you, now there are loads of scholars who have actually argued the non-Hellenistic and Hellenistic influences on Gandhara art. For instance, Parthian influence, for instance, Sakka influence. So there are various stands of scholars, especially Japanese, who have highlighted the other cross-cultural influences on Gandhara art where Hellenism is not the only influence. Sorry, I think in my haste I have missed a couple of slides. Now this is an example that the Fouché would give, that look at this Roman art and look at this Gandhara art. They are very similar. So you can see a direct influence, right? And look at the Apollo and the Buddha. There's a striking similarity. So these guys had a point. I mean, I think they were not completely off the mark, but still there are ways how you interpret the word influence. Oh dear. Right. Now, really getting ahead of the story, I would say that, there's one particular character that I would like to show you. All our Pakistani audience are very much familiar with the character called Hercules, right? Now, Hercules is a Greek sort of, as we have been told, is a Greek character, is a Greek deity, who was much admired by Alexander. Now, what Alexander did was, I'll skip the paper because I can't finish reading in 5 minutes. So this is the guy, Hercules. Now, the hallmark of Hercules is that he's holding a club in his hand, and there is a lion skin, and he's nude, or in some cases, semi-naked. Now, Alexander was in awe of this deity, and he personified himself as Hercules in many coins, as we were told, right? And Hercules is a character which has, as an image, it has flown across. It has flown, let's say, from the Greece to the Rome and to Central Asia, eventually from China, and then, Gandhara. It has kind of traveled across the regions wherever the Hellenistic influence flew. These images also moved along. Now, there's one particular character that we have in Buddhism called Vajrapani. Now, this is a character. Now, Vajrapani is exactly like Hercules. He is carrying all the traits of Hercules, right? But how he's interpreted, now this is seen, this particular Vajrapani example is seen as something which is a copy from the Greek. Now, my concluding point that I really wanted to make is that it is how do we see those influence and what is a copy and what is the original. Now, what was happening was that why, this particular character was adopted by Gandhara sculptors because Hercules was known as a symbol of power and masculine power. So he was, he was entered in the Buddhist iconography as protector of Buddha in the Kushan period, this guy, Vajrapani, had no textual sources in Buddhism. You know, when Buddha left the palace, he was accompanied by a protected deity called Indra, the Vedic deity, which had a Vajra, you know. This guy, Hercules, had a club, and Vajra means a thunderbolt. Thunderbolt is a Vedic storm. It's like a thunderbolt, and it will create a lightning storm. So what they did was they very, very cleverly adopted a particular icon from Hellenic culture in order to get more audience, in order for them, you know, there were lots of Greeks and other people who were converted to Buddhism. In order for them to be relating to the Buddhist iconography, they took an icon, put it in their images, and then this is how they played the game. Now, my argument is that this is not copying or mindless copying. It is actually something which is an active adaptation of a particular motive. I wish I had time to read out what I had written for you to understand fully. But my point, as I could convey, is that this is not mindless copying. It is not a blind influence. It is a metaphor. It is an image which has traveled widely, and every locality has adopted it to suit their own design. Look at the different, this is like an Egyptian version of Hercules. This is actually Iranian version of Hercules. They have replaced a Brahma god and put it like Hercules. There's a club on the left you could see. And this is a Chinese silk banner. Chinese Hercules or Vajrapani is not even distinguishable at all. It cannot be compared to the Hercules. If you don't know, you can't recognize this man. So all I'm saying is, if this particular process of adoption or incorporation is not something which is, as I keep saying, it's not, it's unconscious choice. It is a very conscious selection of certain motives to create more audience and to relate to, cross-cultural civilizations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Tara, for a very illuminating discourse, and particularly for the novel interpretation that you've given of various symbols that we have taken for granted, but in fact have a much deeper significance and origin than that is customary. I'll now leave the floor open for questions. If there are any, please, yes. Perennial, could you please identify yourself for the purpose of our scholars?
My name is Shahzad Naqvi. I'd like to ask the panel, what's the verdict of history on Alexander? Did he overreach? Because what happened to the Greek Empire a few centuries after he left, it never acquired the same shape or size that it had in its time.
Well, would any one of the Greeks reply for the, please?
Well, if I understood well, the gentleman asked what happened to this empire of Alexander the Great after his death, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Unfortunately, Alexander died very young, so he didn't have the chance to stabilized and organized in his way the huge state that he created. And after his death, this huge state was divided in smaller kingdoms, because there was his successors, that everyone, his successors was mostly his friends around him, the aristocrats, the Greeks, Macedonian aristocrats that accompanied him to his campaign. So after his death, every one of them claimed to be his successor. So this huge state, unfortunately, divided into smaller kingdoms. and some of them flourished a lot, such as was the Egyptian one in Egypt and in Antiochia and in the Seleucids, but some of them had a very short time life. This is the future. This is
Good.
what happened after Alexander's death.
Right. Dr. Flora, would you like to add to this? No?
No.
Okay.
But I just, okay, nothing.
Sorry?
No.
Okay.
Nothing.
All right. Can we have another question from the audience, please? Microphone there, please. Could you identify yourself and then, please?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Farooq Sheikh. I just want to make a couple of points and
A question, preferably. A question.
present them as questions.
No. Just a question, because we've got other people here as well.
I'm
With your
sure you
permission.
have. My contention is that we have spoken about Alexander's legacy, and we have just heard the eminent speakers tell us about the intentions of Alexander, which could not materialize because he met an early
Sir, may
death.
I ask you to restrict yourself to your question? Please, if you don't mind, sir. We've got shortage of time.
My question is that we have to, should we not focus, I'm now phrasing it as a question, should we not focus on the fact also that Alexander did not spend sufficient time during his lifetime to consolidating whatever he had created? Because when we speak about divisions amongst his successors, Ptolemy actually hijacked the coffin of Alexander so that he could
Yes.
give his rule legitimacy
Indeed.
over
Well, it's one of these
successors.
questions.
So that's one element.
No, please, may I restrict you? A question, and that is, you're absolutely right. He should have lived longer in order to be able to have consolidated his kingdom. But that's a what if.
Okay, my question
Yes,
is,
certainly.
now I won't wait for the answer, but my question is, Dr. Nadeem has spoken about Hellenistic art and
Yeah.
Hellenic art. Should we not also distinguish between the two? Because Hellenic art was idealized, Hellenistic art was not idealized.
Okay,
And the
right.
visions that we have.
Right. Could I ask then, since you posed the question, Dr. Nadeem, would you be kind enough to answer this question of the distinction between Hellenic art and Gandharan art here?
I didn't exactly get the question, sir.
Well, we're not starting all that again.
The difference between
Essentially,
Hellenic
yeah.
art and
You've mentioned that it was not derivative, okay?
Yes, of
It
course.
is not a content,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it was
Yes,
inspired
of
by
course.
it,
Yes,
but not
yes,
necessarily derivative.
Of
Ji.
course. I mean, of course, sir, of course, I mean, if you look even at the character of Vajrapani, this particular character is drawn on the existing Indian characters. For instance, Indra, the Vedic god, which was actually there as a protector of Buddha, has been replaced, only stylistically by Hercules, not in terms of the deity itself. That stays there, but only the attributes have changed. Like, there's like club, the Hercules was carrying a club, and that deity is now carrying a Vajra. Vajra is something which is associated as a weapon to create a Vedic storm for, with Indra god. So what I'm saying is, obviously these people were choosing carefully from the repertoire of images.
Fine.
There was a conscious act of choice,
Okay.
not blind copying.
All right.
Thank
Can I ask a question of Dr. Polizeni? Which were the statues, which were the icons, which were the images that were brought by the Greeks with them to the subcontinent that allowed the local craftsmen to be able to create Gandharan sculpture?
I believe that, as Dr. Flora Karagianni said, Alexander had in his campaign sculptures, actors, He had writers, he had philosophers, he had architects with him. So I believe that he had with him sculptures that taught to local people how to create this art. And also, he himself produced his icon. Everywhere he traveled, everywhere he conquered, in every place. We have to remind that he created almost 40 new cities.
Yes.
We know the 16 or 17 of them. We have identified this. And in these cities, it is sure that he created also, first of all, his own portrait.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah, right at the back, please. Would you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Abdullah. I had a question regarding Alexander's ambition and the fire that he had inside of him, of conquering the world and moving on along from Greece to conquering more than half of the world. My question is, if he had no successor, if Alexander had no successor after him, what made him conquer the whole world? I mean, there's no point of conquering the world when you can't sustain everything that you have conquered behind you. If we talk about Mehmed II conquered Constantinople because he wanted to make that a stronghold of Islam. I mean, there's no purpose to Alexander's conquest. Was it like this? He was a young boy, going on
Point
conquering everything.
Dr. Flora, would you like to answer that question? Either
yes,
way.
I think. Yeah, the purpose in his campaign was first to take revenge to the Persian Empire, which was a very strong empire. But after this goal she achieved, he conquered the Persian Empire. He wanted to go further, so he arrived up to India. And so he created this huge state.
Good.
And it was
Dr.
his
Flora?
internal pathos, his desire, his internal pathos to discover the world, to go further. Every testimony says that we have.
Good. What we discussed yesterday was, as Dr. Stoneman said, the pathos, that the fire that you've
yes,
just...
that word.
Yeah.
His internal wish.
Yeah, absolutely. What you've described as the fire that was guiding him. Well, the truth is that most dynastic successions with leaders like Alexander, the dynasties create the next generation and then pass on the empire to it. In this case, he had developed the empire because before he had given birth to the next generation. They were born afterwards. So since we're running out of time, may I thank Dr. Polizeni, Adam Villani, for being with us this morning, and it is morning, a very early morning in Greece. And may I also thank Dr. Flora Kargiani for her illuminating lecture, and particularly the introduction of the ascension of Alexander. Here, we talk about his pretensions to being a god, but here you have a more direct manifestation of it, where, rather like the Virgin Mary, rather like with our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, where there is a physical ascension of the body into the heavens, and then presumably a return he had to in order to be able to conquer the world. But thank you very much indeed to both of them, and also to Dr. Nadeem Tarar for being with us today, and for all three of you for providing such interesting insights into Philip II, Alexander, and then the dynasties that followed. Many thanks indeed. And that, for those of you who'd like to ask questions of the scholars, please feel free to interact with them afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Flora and Dr. Polizini and Dr. Nadeem Tar. Thank you also to Fakir Ijazuddin Sahab for moderating such a lovely and interesting session. We now have our second panel of the day, Navigating the Indus and Beyond, the River and the Conqueror. For that, I'd like to invite Ms. Hiba Hashmi on stage. And the other panelists are Dr. Robin Lane Fox, Dr. Matthew Cobb, and Abdul Hamid Baloch. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Hiba Hashmi. I am the co-founder and CEO of the Maritime Archaeology and Heritage Institute, MAHI. We're based in Karachi, and which is why my team and I have a particular interest in this session, which is Navigating the Indus and Beyond, the River and the Conqueror. And I'm very honored to be moderating this session and to have a front row seat in asking a lot of these questions. Like material culture, Indian Ocean Studies is a new field that has evolved in the past decade and a half. It has changed the scope of the humanities, particularly in the study of geographical regions surrounding the Indian Ocean. Being one of the earliest foreign travelers to have fully navigated the Indus River, Alexander's voyage down the river and beyond to his incomplete journey back home along the Makran coast shed new light on his maritime legacy in the region when studied from the lens of the Indian Ocean and its trade networks. As a first, this panel brings together the work of international and local scholars on the subject and on this subject, and it explores what Alexander's maritime exploits mean to us today in our region. I am honored to introduce our first speaker, Robin Lane Fox, who is an emeritus fellow of New College at the University of Oxford, where he was tutor, lecturer, and then reader between 1977 and 2014. His many books have been widely translated, especially his prize-winning Alexander the Great, first published in 1973. He was the historical consultant for Oliver Stone's epic film Alexander, which was released in 2004, in which he led Alexander's cavalry on screen. Robin Lane Fox, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm so sorry. Could you just explain me how the pictures will move? I'm so sorry. I can ride horses. I'm very bad with pictures. Do I just press a button when I want one? I don't know quite how we do it. Sorry.
What is the title?
Yeah, I'm very bad. Yeah. Do I press or what? Probably Indus conference.
Is this it? No, this is for me.
No, sorry, it's Alexander conference.
Is this it?
I hope it's my one here.
This doesn't look
No,
like...
no. Are these what? There we are. No.
No, that's the same one.
I'm sorry.
Is it this one?
No. I'm sorry. This is, here we are. In here. There. No. Go back. I'm sorry. It's on here. I'm so sorry. Otherwise, we just abolish it. Wish I knew. It's here. It's this blue one here. I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Why don't you eject
It's just blue. Right. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm sorry for the delay. Right, we just have a very important gem in Oxford, probably about 250 BC, found in the end at Tel Aviv, made of tourmaline. This is a stamp, and on the inscription, we only realized recently, the words are written in Karachi from northwest Pakistan, and there is Alexander's face. My pictures are not exactly brilliant, but we will see what we can do. Let's have a map. Right. India is a land far away. It is such an honor and pleasure to be here. I would like to say two things. First, I so hope that Karachi and the Endowment Trust Fund will teach Oxford how to give a beautiful conference with many people coming, making us feel really happy and really welcome. It is really marvelous. And secondly, I would just like to say one thing. This autumn, it had been the plan in Turkey, in Iskenderun, to develop the center of the city, the big Ottoman palace, into a center for the study of Alexander as far as India. And tragically, all the buildings of Iskenderun have collapsed in the earthquake and have been flooded. And people, of course, in thousands across that province of Hatay have died. One of the very first countries to send help is Pakistan. And may I say, for my friends in Iskenderun, how marvelous that was and how appreciated, and what a dreadful catastrophe that has been. So it is a pleasure to speak here without a flood at the moment, and try to take you through Alexander in India. I have my map. India is a land far away. The Greeks knew of it very distantly in their homeland before Alexander. Just remember, Alexander had a dog from India, Peritus, whom he took with him from Macedon, and in whose honor he founded a city. Amazing, a city for a dog. At the Persian court, India was better known. We have come to appreciate the awareness of the flowers of this part of northwest India in the ancient terms, and how Ctesias, the Greek doctor at Persia, at Susa, had a real understanding of several of the fine plants that were brought to the Persian court as living specimens, and he wrote about them, and we can identify them exactly. Pandanus, very sweet-scented, and so on. We know that Indians came bringing gifts, tribute, to the Persian king. They were his subjects. They brought a donkey. They brought quantities of gold, probably melted gold, and they were known perfectly well at the Persian court, Persepolis, and at Susa. And in return, envoys from Persia would come out to India. So it is not an unknown world at all within the Persian Empire. In the 6th century, King Darius divided India into various regions or peoples, how we wish to describe them. Gandhara, Satagidya, probably the center part of the Indus, Indus, the Indus River down, and Makar, the Makran Desert. None of these terms reappears in the historians with Alexander. This is still a bit of a puzzle. There is a gap in our knowledge of contact between the Persian Empire and Alexander and India before Alexander. He never refers to satraps, Persian rulers in the area, but it is clearly ruled by rulers and kings in allegiance, at least, sending troops sometimes to the Persian king in Susa. It is not an independent area in many parts of the Indus Valley. But we know so little about the Persian period, very loosely controlled, I think, when Alexander arrived in 326 BC. And he enters a world completely unfamiliar to him and the Greeks. I would like to remind you of the continuities in this part of the world. His admiral, Nearchus, trained by Aristotle, gives us wonderful descriptions of first impressions of the peoples in the Indus Valley. I give you a few. The Indians wear clothes of linen, and the linen comes from trees of which he made mention, cotton. It is brighter in color than any other, and the people's own darkness makes it seem even brighter. They wear linen clothes down to their legs, and another thrown about their shoulders, and one round their head. Some of them wear earrings, but only if they are rich. And they dye their beards with various colors. Very good. Some of them make them as white as possible, others dark blue, that is a good idea, dark red, purple, or as green as the grass. If they are distinguished Indians, they have parasols to protect them from the sun. They have white sandals, beautifully made, you love shoes, and the heels are of different colors and high to make them seem tall. And he goes on, in their shape, the Indians are thin, yes, tall, and much more graceful in their movement than all other people. And then he tells us that the very modest women in India would never misbehave with a man. However, there is one exception. If the man gives them an elephant, then they will go to bed with him and make love. I'm sorry, ladies, I could not bring an elephant with me on the aeroplane. And the Indians do not regard the women who have sex for the sake of an elephant as in any way disgraceful. They think it is splendid. As for other women, they are married. They do not choose, but they are given when they are of an age to marry. They are given to the winners in the public games of wrestling or of boxing or of running. So there you are, ladies. You are waiting in the sports stadium, and when Baba Azam scores 100, you are taken out and you are married to Pakistan's great cricketer. That is the impression, some of the impressions, which are marvelous impressions that we get of the Indian people. And there are two further ones, very, very striking. Their love of music and their love of dancing. There is a wonderful scene as Alexander starts to come down the Indus River, where the Indians on the banks are so amazed by this enormous fleet that they start chanting and singing. They sing barbaricos, which means not in the Greek tongue, and Nearchus says they are fonder of dance and music than all other peoples. There is an amazement between the Macedonians and the Greeks watching the Indians and the Indians watching the Greeks. It's an extraordinary occasion. And they believe not, of course, that the Indians are somehow primitive or savage, that they may be people related back to their own god, Dionysus. It's not at all like, for instance, the attitude of the Mongols when they come across Iran later, that their enemies are subhuman. There is no way. There is an amazement on either side, very much so. The Indian weapons are distinctive. Let me see if I can get a picture again, we know it so well. The famous coin, Porus on horseback, and there is Alexander on his horse, not Bucephalus, attacking him. And then on the right here is Alexander victorious, being crowned by the goddess Victory. These coins, I still believe, were struck at Susa. Soon afterwards, an artist went back to explain exactly how the elephant looked. They're all exact, and how Alexander could be imagined holding a thunderbolt crowned by Victory in memory of the great exploit. Some numismatists think they're just after Alexander's death, but they are a proud record, valuable coins given to the troops to remember that great Indian event. And we also have the remarkable coins. We've seen a picture, but this is perhaps a better one, related to them, struck by the same mint, showing the elephants again, and then the famous war chariots of the Indians with the horses. That is what Alexander faced. Yeah, very much so. Note that the riders on the elephants are not in a little howdah, a little protective box. That did not, I think, yet exist. And on the Greek side, they were amazed by the scale and size of your rivers. Yes, they were amazed by the monsoon. Yes, they encountered flooding. How could they not? They were amazed by the speed of the rivers. And then an extraordinary event, which we don't think of, I think, enough. See what we get here. Yes, good. No, we go back a bit, I think, if I can. Down in the south, for the very first time in the history of Greece, they encounter the tide. And they are amazed that the sea goes out, and they think it's the anger of the gods, and then it comes back, and then it goes out, and then it comes back again. And this is a fundamental change for Greek thinkers. They try to explain what is happening. They're not like Caesar's men when they cross into Britain. They try to explain it in terms of the moon very quickly, and the idea of the tide changes people's ideas of the world and the cosmos. Very striking. And on the other side, Indians are amazed, we're told, to see horses coming down the Indus in boats. I just mention this because later there is a big trade in horses from the south down into India. This is very important, and people believe they come down through the Hindu Kush area from Bactria. They're brought down the caravan route. They must have come down in boats. This was not yet happening in the 4th century BC. Now, various points I wish to emphasize. The numbers in Alexander's army, we discussed this not long ago. This is an enormous expedition. We have to think of up to 120,000 people, including by now many Indians who have joined the forces. We have to think of somewhere between 800 and 2,000 ships. The events we're going to discuss are on a completely different scale to anything in Western medieval history. We don't meet armies of this size in modern history until the 17th century in Western Europe. It is enormous, and it is able to be so big because the Indus River is so fertile, and there are so many hundreds of cities. This is very, very striking. We are told, one moment, I get forwards again. Come on. Why my picture's not working. Anyway, maybe we can get my picture to work. If I press that again, I'm stuck. Can you get it? Anyway, just click. Oh, so sorry, it's a normal. No. No, on. Here we are, good. Yep. We are told that between the Jhelum River and the Beas River, there were 37 cities which had up to 10,000 people. And later, King Porus is given the area of the Punjab to rule. 7 people, and the Greeks may exaggerate a little, over 2,000 cities. I must stress this. It is in no way, of course, true that Alexander is the big introducer of cities to India. There were far more cities in the Indus Valley than anywhere in Greece. And that is an important point. Right. Then they look, of course, and try to understand Indian society, and they look and are aware that there are separate castes, but to them classes. They don't quite get it right. I think they import a model that Herodotus had used to explain Egypt, but they are aware of the separate groups. And the next most important thing, as we discussed yesterday, Alexander begins with no idea of the geography. He thinks, amazingly, that your river Indus runs around, imagine, and you could be in a week in Egypt, because it will connect with the Nile. He has seen crocodiles in both rivers, and on the banks of the Indus, he has seen the pink-flowered lotus with the seed heads and the black beans that he has also seen in Egypt. And those beans are very edible. They're still a major staple in Vietnam. And he reasons from the crocodile and the flora that it is the same river. But he comes very quickly to see that he is wrong. And he also then believes that he will reach, as we have discussed, the end of the world at the bottom of the river delta. Let's see where we get here. We'll go back. We'll go back for a minute. Right. Now, the one point I want to stress is that the India he reaches is not a peaceful, idyllic country. This is really important. You will understand at last. There are many hostilities and many wars between the many, many different rulers. Taxides Omphi hates Porus. Porus is at war with another Porus. Problem of Abyssaries. Musicanus hates Sambus. And of course, Alexander's tale is a tale of death and killing. But remember, if he hadn't come, people would have been killed simply by Porus or Musicanus. He's in a world where he wishes to end the local wars of the kings, and to do so, there is, of course, tragic destruction. But it is not the arrival into a peaceful, perfect utopia destroyed by Western outsiders. That is an implicitly misunderstanding. His tactics are twofold. He sends or receives envoys to the various rulers, and if they return with friendship and agree to join Alexander rather than the Persian Empire, they are favored. No question of any war, destruction, or whatever. It is grossly misleading to describe the campaigns down the Indus as nothing but a war of terror. Many other of the kingships come over to Alexander. But if they do not, or if they rebel, they are treated exactly as Philip had treated the Greek cities on the edge of Macedon, or Alexander had treated North Afghanistan. They are attacked without mercy. So you have a choice. Do you join the new king and suppress your wish for local independence, or give up your local independence? And are you then protected from your neighbors? Can you use Alexander's army against your enemies in India? Or, bravely, do you say, we do not want him, we are going to kill him? And there are three very powerful people in India, groups of the many tribes singled out by the Greeks, and it is known to Alexander when he has to turn back, I haven't time to discuss why, from the river Beas, that he will be opposed on the way down the Hydaspes. He knows that two particular people, the Mali and the Oxydraci, Arian 643, really important, grossly neglected in some modern accounts, are again a big army of 100,000 people or more to destroy him. And that is why he moves so fast and why various of their cities are promptly destroyed. This is not the universal pattern. Other tribes and other kings are received in honor. There are many examples. At first, as we'll hear from, I'm sure, Richard Stoneman, Musicanus, and then in a panic, the adjoining kingdom to which I will talk, Sambus. It is absolutely untrue that Alexander's march down the river Indus is just a campaign of destruction by a king trying to fight to come home and wishes to abandon it all. He's somehow enraged for his failure to get out to the Eastern Ocean. That is a travesty of what was not just a tragedy. Nor is there a new level of savagery, nor is it simply an attempt to rule by terror. If you oppose him, total terror. Of that we are, of course, well aware. Now, he comes to realize that the Indus very quickly does not run round, I'm afraid, into Egypt. He believes that it flows out into the South Ocean and is the edge of the world. And this is very important to him. I want to stress the importance of your southern coast. He had been denied, he thought, the eastern edge of the world down the Ganges. He comes south and he engages in a very prolonged and important series of offerings and ritual sacrifices at the mouth of the Indus River, a sequence of them. and he goes twice to 2 of the islands. Obviously the coastline has changed, but people believe they can identify still which the islands were, makes complicated sacrifices in accordance with the oracular orders of the god Ammon. I must emphasize this. He only does it here on the whole course of his march. Ammon is the god he had visited in Egypt. He had come to believe from the visit that he really was in some way the son of Zeus. But Ammon seems to have given him exact instructions for the gods that he is to offer at this point only in his march. I accept that one question to the oracle in Egypt is the famous simple Greek question: to which gods and goddesses should I sacrifice on my journey eastwards? Alexander at this time, I'd remind you, is 24, 25. He hasn't yet beaten the Persian king. But because he only sacrifices at the mouth of the Indus River here in your country, I think he asked, to which gods and goddesses should I sacrifice when I reach the outer edge of the world? I differ here strongly from recent historians. Alexander is such a success because he has a grand design, an amazing design, very early in his life. As his friend and historian Aristobulus wishes us to know, his aim was to conquer Tupantos, the lot, everything. His aim was to conquer to the edge of the world, and Darius was a local interruption. And it is here on your river Indus, having failed in the east, that he finds, he thinks, the ocean in the south, and he carries out the instructions of the god Ammon. That is what he's trying to do. Conquer it all, stop the internal wars, having provoked wars meanwhile, and then rule it as a joined-up whole. Now, as part of the joined-up whole, Alexander founds new cities. And I want to discuss this with some hesitation. You live in this country. You know all the locality. I want to suggest and endorse particular sites. Even before he turns back on the river Beast, the one right on the right, just now inside India, he has founded 3 cities in the Punjab. He has founded one on the Kenab, the Akasines River, the ancient site, we believe, of Sohadra. I've never seen it. On the river Jhelum, he founds 2. Nicaea, city of victory, and famously Bucephala, in honor of the great horse. Alexander never founds a city in honor of a woman. He founds one in honor of his dog and another in honor of his horse. Now, the memory of the horse lives on. Here is a coin, beautifully reproduced for me in Oxford, of Alexander struck under the Seleucus 10 years later with the horned horse, symbolizing Bucephalus. There's much argument, but I think this really is a memory of Bucephalus and his significance for Alexander. And then there are the many legends of where Bucephalus is buried. Here is one. Absolutely beautiful. The legend in Uzbekistan is that Bucephalus was buried under that lake. Nonsense. He was buried here in Pakistan. And the question is very much where. So, we have, I think, okay, I'll try to do my best. I have 5 minutes. I have to get through it. I think that we should look carefully, not just at Jalalpur on the river Jhelum, but at a site described very well for me by Michael Wood, who made a big BBC program. I recommend his account of the topography in this area, possibly at Garjak. And I'd just like to read his account of it. Under the trees, where Greek pottery has been found above Jalalpur, there is a ruined city known as Garjak. Muslim graves here are covered with bright green silk with scarlet and golden edges, lifting and floating in the evening wind, with flags and ribbons round the branches. Here, a legend at the former Hindu shrine for many years was told to me by the Muslim guardian. It's the story of a conflict between the old Hindu goddess and the Muslim holy man who took over the site, whereupon the horse ridden by the goddess ascended out of the way to heaven and fell to earth to be buried here. Perhaps, he says, this wonderful spot, Guard Jack, please try to investigate, marks the very tomb of Bucephalus, a wonderful place and magical. Thirdly, Alexander has also, on the river Kenab, founded, you see here, that's the Achesines, has founded a big city before turning back, told Hephaestion to found one, which is, I think, probably the modern site of Sohadra. So there are 3 cities there. Then he turns back and he continues, and he founds another. Do you see where I have put Alexander at the confluence? I'm going to take a moment because I know this is perhaps the most interest to you. I'd just like to show one picture of something not previously well known. This is the modern shrine to Bucephalus, built in the 1990s. I'm going to go to see it in his honor at an individual Pakistani's expense, beautifully done, with a poem describing Bucephalus's fine achievements. Here we are.
Mr. Fox, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but just in the interest of keeping time, will we be wrapping up?
I'll be as quick as I can.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have just got 2 things important to say about Sewan. The map from Pella to Greece and the Alexander Monument. Right. Then at Uch, here I think is the ancient site, which is Alexandria Opiani. I feel this very clearly, described by the Greek geographer Hecataeus in 500 BC, who must be using the book of Skylax, who sailed down the Indus, who describes the Opii, the tribe on the Indus River with the desert beyond. It's nothing to do with Afghanistan. This is Alexandria Opiani, beautifully described again by Michael Wood. I'll just give you, if you wouldn't mind, because I've come a long way. I talked at the site of Uch to an elderly man with a pointed beard and an outside turban, guardian of the site's history. And he said to me, Uch had many names in the olden days. The present name means a high place. When the Muslims first came here, it was called Iskandara because Alexander came here. It was here he built a city, supposedly 10 kilometers round, on the eastern mound. And Wood comments, the sun was setting, the blue tiles were luminous in Uch in the last light. It is a lovely spot, one of the most delightful in the whole subcontinent. Another Alexandria, a delightful place to live, worth remembering. Yeah. Then he comes on down, he makes new walls at a site, Sogdia. See if I can just get on. Oh, damn. No, here we are. Below, just a bit lower, another Alexandria. And then he encounters a mixture of surrender and rebellion. Just give me 1 minute, because this is so important for the conference. Here is our site of Sewan. With great caution, I want just to give my view, the old view of Sewan. Scholars here may know the view of Egremont, that Sewan is really to be found no reason to think Alexander would go so far north. Sewan, for me, is Cinder Manor, the capital of the Indian ruler Sambus, who then rebels against Alexander. I think there is a decisive reason. Sambus had been made the satrap of the mountainous Indians, There are the mountains to the left of Sewan, and he has a very big troop, I want to stress this, of elephants. Now, elephants are not going to live right up where Egmont has put them. There is not the same water, there's no lake, it's a relatively dry area. Sewan is perfect. It has a little river, it has the Indus, it has the lake we'll see. That's where the elephants used to roll in mud. That's how there were so many of them for the king. And I suggest, again, the 19th century view is correct, that Sewan in this period is Sindomana, the capital of Sambus, whose people, despite Sambus, surrender to Alexander. And that is important to him. Then Alexander goes down to Patala. Possibly people think Hyderabad, maybe a little bit further south. And he wants the city to surrender to him and people be allowed to resettle there. And he sends men, what an awful job, to dig wells to make the land habitable, oikesimos, not just for temporary water. He's making a big settlement there as well. And then the last point I want to stress, he marches, my pictures I'm afraid are not going to be good, but we'll try. Oh, come on. I can't do it. And before he enters the desert, this is really important, my final point, he founds in what we think is Las Belas on the Purali River, a city which he wants to be great and prosperous. Always a puzzle. But I do think on this one point, the English historian Peter Fraser has realized what was in Alexander's mind. There is a route from the Purali River, very important caravan route, right up towards Quetta, through the Bolan and the Kalat passes, which connects up into Afghanistan. And I accept Fraser's view that Alexander is aware of this. He has connected southern Afghanistan to Gedrosia, Baluchistan, and the Makran Desert already with a satrap. He is aware of the caravan route, and he is founding a city on that route because he knows that it will then be prosperous. Boats put in at the port, and there is a traffic the whole time. You know how important the caravan routes are up into Kandahar, Herat, and these other foundations. This is really important. Along with the other cities which are meant to be permanencies, Alexander still has a vision of a joined-up empire. He knows about this place. He sent Craterus on the northern part of the route. The vision of Thomas Holditch in 1908 is entirely convincing that this is the crucial approachway from western, from up through Baluchistan into Afghanistan. Alexander has seen it. So I would just like to suggest that we have Alexandria Opiani, we have the capital, Sindomana, we have the foundation at Patala, and we have the foundation on the Purali River. These are coherent long-term plans. It is quite untrue that Alexander was simply fighting to get home, killing everyone whom he met, with no idea of a permanent fixture for his conquests. He had a vision here, and what went wrong was that he died. And he was hoping that you would be part of a joined-up empire, again, as far as Susa and the West. It would be an empire at peace, that with his new foundations, routes and caravan routes would bring prosperity to the area, and he was developing the Persian Gulf. I completely disagree with dear Paul Cartledge that all there was to Alexander was a general and a commander. Generals, I hardly need tell Pakistan, can also think very carefully. Alexander had a grand vision, and you were part of it. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to be a bit long. The pictures were complicated. I'm sorry, it was a bit long. There we are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fox, for that insightful presentation and the very vivid descriptions from start to finish of the people, of everything that Alexander encountered when he came here, and most importantly of the specifics of the journey that we often refer to Alexander's journey down the Indus, and we forget or we lose sight of how complex such a journey actually is, especially when you're doing it for the first time. So we really appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Matthew Cobb, Dr. Matthew Adam Cobb is a lecturer in ancient history at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. He is the author of the monograph Rome and the Indian Ocean Trade from Augustus to the early 3rd century CE, published in 2018. And has edited the following books. Firstly, The Indian Ocean Trade in Antiquity, Political, Cultural, and Economic Impacts, published in 2019, and Globalization and Transculturality from Antiquity to the Pre-Modern World, published last year. The title of his paper is Nearchus's Expeditionary Voyage from the Indus River to the Makran Coast. Dr. Cobb, thank you.
Yes, it is this one, yeah. Yeah, sure. Oh, okay. Do I change that to? No. Oh, leave that. Okay. Oh, brilliant. Excellent, fantastic. Just before I start, I want to very quickly thank the Endowment Fund Trust for their generosity and hospitality, and for the broader hospitality and generosity of the people of Sindh. Very much appreciate it. I'll launch straight into it then. So when Alexander's army campaigned down the Indus, they were not traveling through an isolated region, but one that had been linked into various overland and maritime networks, probably since at least the Bronze Age, and would have manifested themselves in different ways over that period. Indeed, so when Alexander's army arrived there, as I say, not in an isolated region, but one that was quite well connected. The author Onesicritus, who had accompanied Alexander, had said to learn information about Taprabani, that is modern Sri Lanka, from the inhabitants of Patala, so from peoples living in the Sindh region. And we also have similar references in the Jatakas to trade between Sindh and Benares. So in this paper, I have two relatively modest aims. The first is to assess what our patchy evidence can tell us about the nature of trade connections between the Indus Delta and the Mediterranean world in the centuries following Alexander. And the second interrelated aim is to think about how this impinged on Greco-Roman conceptions of the region. Did the activities of merchants and travelers lead to a floret of new information, or did Alexander's legacy continue to dominate the classical, historical, geographic, and ethnographic traditions? Before going on to explore these topics in a bit more depth, or in as much depth as is possible in the time, it's worth briefly reflecting on some of the challenges faced by those who wish to study historical connections between these regions. These challenges not only include the availability of evidence, but how it might be interpreted. And I think this is particularly relevant when it comes to issues of identity, agency, and whether material culture can be viewed as proxies for wider socio-economic or cultural phenomena. And I think some of these themes have come up already in a number of the papers. Increasing archaeological work at a range of international sites in the wider Indian Ocean world has greatly increased our understanding of what's happening in the ancient Indian Ocean world in recent decades. But challenges remain for a variety of reasons. For example, at the really important site of Bambor, where great work is being done, Professor Pierre Chienti Forani, for example, had noted that it was difficult to excavate below the late Indo-Parthian, Indo-Scythian layers due to the water table. So some of these types of challenges still, among others, can face individuals trying to study sites and material culture. So I think the Begram hoard is an interesting example of one of these questions of trying to use material culture as proxies for wider processes. The collection of 400 odd objects found at Begram, a site in Afghanistan, potentially in the 1st, 2nd or 3rd century CE, there's lots of debate about that, I think provide a good example of some of these controversies. Over the decades, there's been lots of debate about whether this was a royal treasury or a merchant storehouse, whether these items reflect cosmopolitan consumption in the Kushan Empire, or whether it was a reflection of their supposed middleman role in the Indus branch of the Silk Road. Of relevance for us is Cambon's analysis of the copious glassware from the site. The Cambon suggests an Egyptian origin for these pieces, and particularly on the basis of chemical analysis. And this may give credence to the idea that at least with some of these Mediterranean objects, they were being transported up via a port like the Barbaricon on the mouth of the Indus and taken up country through networks to Bagram, although no doubt there is much debate about this still. So if we turn to our main subject, we can see in the immediate centuries following the death of Alexander that trade links between the Indus Delta, the Persian Gulf, and Red Sea regions continued to grow. Since I'm short on time, I'm not going to dissect the scattered pieces of material, papyrological, and literary testimony that there is, but instead I'm going to focus my attention on different narratives about how Greco-Roman mariners became increasingly involved in cross-oceanic voyaging. And I want to pause here and just make a point that this is one vantage point in lots of complex connectivities involving many different peoples from different regions in the wider Indian Ocean world. So, but nonetheless, for the purposes of this paper and for the theme that we're covering in this conference, I thought it would be useful to focus on these particular connections. So when it comes to the development of Greco-Roman mariners, among others, increasingly getting involved in cross-oceanic voyaging, we've got two broad literary traditions surrounding these developments in classical literature. You've got one connected to an individual called Eudoxus of Cyzicus, and the other to a possibly imagined figure called Hippolos. So we go with the first tradition connected to Eudoxus. We're told by Posidonius, a late 2nd, early 1st century BC intellectual in the Roman world, that a shipwrecked Indian sailor was discovered at by the Ptolemaic coastal guards who'd accidentally ended up in the Red Sea. Having been taught Greek in Alexandria, the sailor promised to help navigate an expeditionary party to India, of which Eudoxus was a member. We got an initial voyage being said to take place under Ptolemy VIII, and then a subsequent one under Cleopatra III, so this places it in the last 2 decades of the 2nd century BCE. Hippolos' narrative is briefly relayed, the Hippolos narrative, so the other narrative, is briefly relayed by the author of the Periplus Maris Erythraei. The author of this text makes the following statement: the helmsman Hippolos, having observed the positions of the Emporia and the characteristics of the sea, was the first to voyage over open sea. So this possibly invented figure can't be chronologically placed beyond the fact that presumably he predates the mid-1st century CE, because this is when the author of the Periplus was active. He was an actual merchant trader who was involved in Indian Ocean trade. Pliny adds a reference to a Hippolos wind that merchants would use to sail from Syagris on the Arabian coast to the area of Patala on the Indus Delta. So much debate surrounded whether Eudoxus or Hippolos were real Columbus-esque figures, or if we're really looking at longer-term processes of developing navigational techniques and having greater understanding of the western shoreline of South Asia. And increased knowledge that would allow for greater confidence that you're going to reach your destination. So imagine how terrifying it would be to sail out into the open ocean, not be able to see the coastline, and then just praying to God, to Allah, that you will actually arrive on the coast opposite you. So one such, so this is, I think this idea of progressive development as knowledge is more likely to be applicable than some Columbus-esque figure. But of primary interest for our purposes is how these processes developed and the importance of intermediary hubs in the period. One such hub was Socotra, the island of Socotra, and our 2nd century BC author Agathocades comments that the Fortunate Islands, that is Socotra, acted as a meeting point for merchants from Patala, so our merchants from the Indus Delta, from Persia and from Carmania, so another part of Iran, and likely also merchants operating from Egypt, if we can accept Cosmas's much later testimony. The southern coast of Arabia, particularly the site of Aden, is also represented in some of our sources as acting as an intermediary hub. So the settlement called Udayan I Arabia, and the settlement of Aden called Udayan I Arabia in the Periplus, is said to have received cargoes from both those coming from Egypt and India, but their merchants did not travel further. No explicit date is provided for the site's heyday, but we've got a reference to it being sacked by Kaiser. There's a lot of debate about how we should interpret this, but I think the salient point for our purposes is that it led some to come to the view, very dubious view in my view, that there was some kind of Arab monopoly that prevented merchants from South Asia and from Egypt sort of traveling on further. And that supposedly this is broken in the Augustan period and there was a floodgate of trade opening. But in contrast to this idea, Pliny the Elder in the mid-1st century CE presents a more progressive or longer-term picture. He comments that in the period after the voyage of Nearchus, traders operating from Egypt would set sail from Cape Saelgros on the Arabian coast in order to cross over to Patala, as we've mentioned, using a favonius or hippolus wind, so a westerly wind. Subsequently, a shorter and safer crossing was made from Cape Saelgros to Sagiris, a site that's, a location that's not been definitively pinned down, but could be Gujarat, could be the western coast of India. And then Pliny finally goes on to detail accounts about how merchants in his own time would travel from Alexandria and sail to Emporia like Mazuris and Nelkunda in what would be the Malabar coast today. Pliny doesn't give precise chronological parameters for these apparent stages of navigation, but beyond the fact that they're supposed to happen at some time after Alexander. But I would argue from documentary evidence, notably the appearance of Ptolemaic officials connected to oversight of activity in the Erathian and Indian seas, the account about Eudoxus that we've just mentioned, and Strabo's rather acerbic comments about Ptolemies and the revenue they generated from this, that cross-oceanic voyaging was already taking place by the late Ptolemaic period. So we don't need to imagine from Pliny's account that all trade links between Roman Egypt and South Asia centered on the Malabar coast by his time. There has been some debate about the intensity of connections between the Red Sea and different parts of South Asia, with some suggesting stronger links to southern South Asia, based on finds at ports like Berenike and Mars Homos in Egypt, and also the absence of Roman coins, for example, in the northwest. Nonetheless, it's made very explicitly clear in the Periplus that trade links with Patala, with the Indus Delta, well, he doesn't use the term Patala, but with the Indus Delta region, very much are in existence in the 1st century CE. In fact, he explicitly mentions that those who set out from Egypt for Scythia, so that would be roughly the area, if you think of kind of modern Balochistan leading into the Sind, would set out in July. And the author gives a fairly vivid description of the seaboard of Scythia, so along the coast of modern Pakistan, going up to the Indus, that would lead up to the river, what he calls the river Sinthos. Now, reference is made to the coloration of the sea caused by river discharge, which interestingly came up in discussion in dinner last night, and the appearance of snakes called Graai, and details about the 7 river mouths, with the middle one apparently only being navigable. So vessels would anchor at the Barbaricon, a port on the Indus, and they would have their cargoes taken upriver to the metropolis of Scythia, called Minigar, to which we're told the Parthians, i.e. the Indo-Parthians, were constantly chasing each other off it. At Minigar, there's a market for a range of textiles, a gemstone called golden stone, which is likely a reference to peridot from the Red Sea, silverware, money, coral, wine, storax, and frankincense. With the exception of frankincense, most of these likely came from the Roman world, kind of further giving strength to the connections between the region. And in return, one could pick up certain plant products like bdellium and nard, cerux skins, turquoise, lapis lazuli, cloth, and indigo. Some of the plant-based products potentially are coming from the Indus area, potentially some maybe from the more deserty area of Balochistan. Things like lapis lazuli would be coming from further north, cerux skins potentially from Central or Eastern Asia. We've got other evidence that might point to direct or indirect trade links, including red coral beads found at the stupa at Mir Parkas in the Sind, 5 surface finds of aureae of Antoninus Pius at Manikila near Rawat, And in the other direction, it's been suggested that an emerald found at the site of Mirabel, a Gallo-Roman emerald, may come from the Swat Minagora area based on oxygen isotope analysis. Pliny's comment about the availability of smaragdi of green stones from Scythia might seem to add some credence to this testimony. But probably actually the links between the Indus were much stronger with the Persian Gulf region. And this is apparent from the testimony of the Periplus, from epigraphic and pictorial evidence connected to the Palmyrines, some of whom mentioned voyaging to Scythia. And Jean-Francois Salle has even actually suggested that the appearance of some Mediterranean material in the Persian Gulf...
Recording in progress.
Okay. That some material that's from Mediterranean origin that appears in the Persian Gulf is actually potentially indirectly coming via the Indus Delta. Besides some of these trade contacts, we get reference to diplomatic contacts during the reign of Augustus. So we have reference to 2 embassies coming from Scythia and India. There's a account of the first embassy that is connected to Paulus Erosius, and he mentions that Indians and Scythians met Augustus when he was at Taraco, a city in Spain, and this would be roughly around 25 BC. And then you get a second subsequent embassy that arrived at Antioch and then went on to Samos, roughly around 20 BC. And a comment by Cassius Dio might suggest that these two are related, these 2 embassies might have been interrelated. So much controversy surrounded the goals of the second embassy, the identity of the ruler that sent it, the polities of the Sakas, the Indo-Parthians, or the Satavahans have all been suggested. But a reference to a Zamano Chegas, who was part of this embassy, who's said to come from Bargoza, likely Baragaza in the Gujarat, at least points to a northwestern polity. So we're going to leave aside the question of the goals of the embassy because we really don't have enough detail about it, to be honest. There's been various suggestions that it was either for commercial reasons or some kind of military alliance. But instead I'm going to focus to the allusions of Alexander that are made in connection to both embassies. In the first embassy, Paulus Erosius makes a direct comparison paralleling Augustus's receiving of Indians and Scythians at the far western city of Taraco to the almost certainly apocryphal claim that Alexander received envoys from Spain and Gaul when he'd returned to Babylon. The ambassadors are also supposed to have extolled the glories of Alexander to the Emperor Augustus, which, assuming that ever happened, I can't really imagine what Augustus' reaction would have been. Strabo's reference to Pandion or another Porus, and the parallels between Zarmano Chagas and Calanus, the former who is said to have burnt himself alive at Athens, would require a little effort on the part of people in the Greco-Roman world to see the parallels between Augustus and Alexander. So there's 2 potential ways that one could interpret this. The first is to view these comparisons between Augustus and Alexander as largely fabrications by our Greco-Roman authors, part of their imagination, or either themselves kind of embellishing in their own accounts, or potentially actually picking up on Augustan messaging, Augustan propaganda, if you want to use potentially an anachronistic term, that may be apparent in the original account of Nicholas of Damascus. The second possibility is that the envoys were highly conscious of the significance of Alexander's legacy and tried to exploit this cultural memory with the aim of giving a more favorable reception from Augustus, but we can't really be definitive about either possibility. So with this, I'm going to move on to very briefly onto my second aim, which is thinking about to what extent did these commercial contacts with the Indus lead to the spread of new knowledge about the region in the Roman imperial period? How easily could ancient authors escape from the shadow of Alexander's legacy and the scientific reports of those that had accompanied his expedition? The simple answer to the latter question is it depends on where you look. So, unsurprisingly, Alexander's campaign down the Indus, his march across the Gradosian desert, and the voyage of Nearchus loom large in a historical, biographical, and ethnographic discourse that you get in Greek and Roman sources. However, this isn't to say that more contemporary information failed to intrude. Egamont, who's been brought up already, for example, argues that the impression given by Curtius Rufus, possibly a 1st century CE author, that Alexander had only sailed down one branch of the Indus Delta could reflect an anachronism indicative of more contemporary trade with the barbaric on our port on the Indus Delta. But it's the geographic, topographic, and encyclopedic literature where we can most readily see the interplay between intellectual tradition, that can be traced back to Alexander's time and the immediate generations following him, versus newer geographic and topographic information deriving from merchant sources. Strabo nicely, a Augustan period geographer, Strabo nicely exemplifies these potential tensions. At one point in his geography, he apologizes for having to rely on the accounts of those who accompanied Alexander and on later authors like Apollodorus of Artemita. Bear in mind, Strabo is about a few hundred years later than Alexander's time. And yet, nonetheless, despite apologizing for this, when more contemporary information was available from merchants' reports, he expresses contempt, disdain. For example, he dismisses the testimony of those who sail from Egypt to India and the Ganges, since they are merely private citizens and of no use regarding the history of the places they've seen. So obviously it tells you something about Strabo's prejudices there. Nonetheless, later in the imperial period, Pliny does seem to sometimes draw on the accounts of Alexandrian merchants and financiers when discussing trade routes, and the geographer Claudius Ptolemy, a 2nd century CE writer, also makes use of topographic data likely derived from merchants. But even if both these authors make use of merchant testimony, they remain heavily influenced by Hellenistic era literature that was so connected to the legacy of Alexander. Notably, one can see this in Ptolemy's orientation. Oh, sorry, I should have skipped ahead a slide there. You can notably see this in Ptolemy's orientation of South Asia, which very much gives a more west-east axis. If you can see on the map there, it probably doesn't quite look like the subcontinent South Asia as you might recognize it. In contrast, an author like the Periplus gives a more southwest axis, a slightly more accurate one. But for Ptolemy, he doesn't seem to move beyond his established intellectual models. So, no, that is correct. So if we think about the sort of maritime vantage point, a striking feature of the Periplus is his willingness to incorporate information deriving from Arabian and South Asian merchants, among others, which is obviously very different from our more intellectual tradition. This includes topographic details and ethnonyms that can often be absent from our scientific tradition in Greco-Roman literature. Of particular interest for us is the reference to the term synthos, to allude to the Indus River, in contrast to the more typical Indos, or Indus in Latin, although Ptolemy does also make use of the former term. The author's description of the Indus stands out. As already noted, he refers to the 7 river mouths, of which only the middle one is navigable, in contrast to authors like Strabo, who are clearly following this kind of Alexander tradition and emphasize the perspective of those coming down the Indus and mentions about the 2 branches in the island of Pataline. Interestingly, Claudius Ptolemy does also break the mold by mentioning the 7 branches of the Indus. Egamon had assumed he was mistakenly including other rivers like the Hab in this description as one of the branches of the Indus, and that this idea derived from the dubious Ionian tradition of drawing parallels with geographic equivalents. So the Indus was assumed to be the geographic equivalent of the Nile, as has been mentioned, and the Nile has 7 mouths, and therefore the Indus must have 7 mouths. But I actually wonder whether Claudius Ptolemy have actually been borrowing from merchant sources, where from a coastal perspective, if you're going along coast, it may well look like streams or rivers that aren't actually necessarily part of the Indus but are very close could be understood as branches of them. So a very different perspective there. A major distinction between the intellectual tradition and the merchant tradition is one of this vantage point. So for those who are interested in natural features, flora, fauna, ethnography in Central and Southern Asia, the accounts of big men, I use that very much in inverted commas there, like those who accompanied Alexander, was of paramount utility. Whereas for an author like the Periplus, topographic features, natural phenomena were of primary interest when they could be used to provide reference points. So if you're sailing along the coast, you want to be able to identify where you're going, know where you're reaching, and you also want to be very aware of dangerous points along the coast where you could get shipwrecked. So we have lots of references to that in the Periplus. And this coastal perspective is pretty typical of Periploi. But it does also make some references to political and security circumstances, but in particular we see a reference to goods desired by particular rulers and courtiers in specific locations. Oh, sorry, I think I had accidentally skipped ahead too much of a slide there. The juxtaposition of these 2 perspectives can nicely be encapsulated in Pliny's discussion of Patala, the region of Patalis, so our Indus Delta region. When talking about the Indus River region, Pliny includes information about distances, possibly some connected to Nearchus, tribes of people, mythic traditions linked to Hercules and Father Liber, cities founded by Alexander, and geographic features such as the apparent triangular shape of Pataline. Ideas, as we've seen, that can be connected to the Alexander's campaign and its aftermath in terms of scientific understanding. In contrast, when talking about the development of voyages between Egypt and South Asia, in particular to Patala, as we've seen, he seems to draw on merchant sources. So, to conclude briefly, did new information deriving from merchants and travelers ever supplant information from earlier Alexander era and Hellenistic intellectuals who continue to dominate imperial era Indography? The answer seems to be largely no. However, it does appear that in some geographic and encyclopedic literature, there was a willingness to use the merchant sources as a supplement. So new information that could be topographic or providing toponyms, sailing schedules, does seem to have added as a supplement rather than a replacement. But when it comes to ethnographic and political information, potentially gleaned by merchants, our intellectual sources largely ignore them. That's the point I will conclude on. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cobb, for that incredible presentation and giving us an idea beyond Alexander of how his legacy was distinctly maritime in terms of connecting the Indus Delta to maritime trade networks between Europe and even locally within the Indian Ocean. Could I invite Dr. Cobb and Professor Fox to join us on stage for the panel discussion, if possible? Just so that we're ready for the discussion after the final talk. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Abdul Hamid Baloch on stage. Dr. Abdul Hamid Baloch has a Bachelor in Science with distinction in Botany, Microbiology and Physiology from the University of Karachi. He completed his PhD in 2001 from McGill University in Canada. In 1992, Dr. Baloch worked as a research fellow at the PCRWR project in the Department of Botany at the University of Karachi and as a lecturer at the Department of Botany, University of Balochistan in Quetta. In 2000, he worked as a teaching assistant at the Department of Plant Science at McGill University and as assistant professor at the Faculty of Agriculture at Lasbela University of Agriculture, Water and Marine Sciences in Balochistan, where he is currently Faculty of Agriculture. The title of his paper is Nearchus's Expeditionary Journey from the Indus River to the Makran Coast. Please.
I'm sorry, I just need to request our friends who stand here in this corner unnecessarily disturbing the peace of the speaker. Their movement is not required. So either they sit down and they close this door, or they just go out and stay there. Please don't move here, there, and everywhere when the speaker is talking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to present my topic on Nearchus expeditionary voyage from Indus River to Makran Coast. Dr. Robin takes Alexander from the top of upper Indus to the lower Patala safely and soundly. Now I will take Alexander to deep water or troubled waters. And yesterday, Dr. Robbins also mentioned that all his success put aside, it was the Makran who defeated Alexander the Great. My name is Hamid Baloch, and I am the third Hamid of this conference, and I'm thankful first two Amids who invite me to this conference. Nearchus was the admiral who took the marine expedition at Makran coast from Patala to Kirman. And it is noteworthy to mention that Nearchus was not the first choice of Alexander the Great. According to Strabo, he offered this leadership to two generals, but they refused because of the unknown destination. But later on, Nearchus come forward and voluntarily offered his service to his king. And he also narrated a small speech before his king and then say, I will take all the ships and boats and along with the people to proceed to these unknown waters, and then I will be responsible for their safety too. Thank you very much. The question that arises, why Alexander chose this desolate place for his retreat from the Indus to the Pora or Persepolis? Was he unaware about the hardship he faced during this journey? I don't think so. Because before Alexander, Herodotus' history about Makkuran, particularly the coastal Makkuran, was already available, and he possibly his teacher Aristotle taught him, in which it mentioned that the people of this area are called the Ethiopian of the Asia, which have the straight hair rather than curly hairs, and comparatively fair skin as compared with the Ethiopian. He was talking about the Ethiopeges or Gidrosian of the Makkuran coast. The second thing, legend of Semiramis and the Cyrus the Great. Arian mentioned about the legend of the Semiramis, which was a queen of the New Babylonian or Ashurian queen who went on an expedition to India to try to conquer, but chose this Makkuran coast, but she left all our soldiers were died, except few soldiers left. Same with Cyrus the Great. And another important aspect is to punish the Oriti tribes. Yes, because the Oriti tribes were belonged to Indus or were the part and parcel of the Mak or Achaemeni, the Mak or Magan, who were along with all the international soldiers attacked Greece during that before the Alexander. Alexander wanted to punish them too. Thirdly, discovery of new routes and information gathering. As Dr. Robin mentioned that he was already conquered the known world of the time, therefore he wanted to consolidate all his boundaries. For this purpose, he need information. Therefore, he want to take the voyage from this coastal area to the Pora or Persepolis. The fourth one, no doubt it is the shortest route from India to Persepolis. Compared with Afghanistan or Arachosia or elsewhere, it is comparatively shortest route. Therefore, it is easier to go through this route rather than going again upward and then proceed to make a U-turn and then coming back to Persepolis. Sorry. Oh, can you? Thanks. Okay. This table is a combination of several authors, like primary sources as well as the secondary sources. Primary sources like Arrian, Strabo, Ptolemy, Pliny, Marcion, and Diodorus, as well as the secondary sources like D.D. Vincent and Dobbins, Mockler, Stein, and Thomas Oldeck, and as well as the local folklore or local information also gathered in this exhaustive list of the areas which mentioned by with the Greek name as well as their present name, and the distance with the mentioned in the Greek chronologist and their actual distance or their conversion into kilometer, and the country in which type of tribes were resided. The first one, from Petala, from Karakola, modern days Karachi, Nearchus reached at Erebus or Ab River, which is the next city situated in proximity of the Karachi. The tribe who were resided at this area called Arabiti, Nearchus met Arabiti tribes near Karokala, found 2 islands in the sea. These islands were Chorna Island, which still exists. It means that from Karokala to Erebus River, the area belongs to Arabiti tribe. From Arabiti, thence to Pagala, which is Naka Kadi, present days, the country of Oriti started or began, and it lasts till the Malana or Ras Malan. This Pagala, according to some Greek chronologists, famous for bronze object and ruled by a queen. The Greeks are always has a passion when they see some peculiar step, then they mention that this area was ruled by a queen. According to Dobbins, because some Greek chronologists by mistake compare the Pagala with Patliputra or something like that. Therefore, they say it is ruled by a queen. Then, from Pagala to Kabana, which is nowadays Sonmiani, due to good anchorage, Nearchus made a stopover at this station. And from Kabana, then he reached the center of the Oreti tribe, known as Rambika. It is one of the main cities due to which, from Patala, Alexander the Great took that harsh voyage or harsh retreat from the Indus. It is the main center of the Oreti. One of the main reasons of Alexander's expedition on Makran coast, fierce battle took place between Greek and natives. Leonatus installed as the governor. Nearchus built, later on, when the Nearchus reached at this place after a month, because Alexander left the Patala a month ahead of Nearchus. It is noteworthy to mention here that in this region, Kabana or Rambika, Alexander settled the people from Arachosia just for the sake to control the local tribes. Then come Timoros. Some chronologists also mention that it is the first Alexandria in, it is the second one, because the first one was Rambika in Makran coast. It is the second Alexandria situated in proximity of the Oreti country or near the Ingol river. There are 3 tribes were mentioned. First is Oreti, the second is Sorais, and third one is Parsidi or Gedrosian. It is the first time the Gedrosian are mentioned in the Greek, in the annals of the Greek chronologist. 7th month of, it is also known as, it is also called the 7th mouth of the Indus. A confederacy of the small tribes combined made a large Oreti tribes. A fierce battle took place between the confederation of the local tribes and the Greeks. They were defeated, fled, and then captured. It is the area actually. Yesterday, someone I think in his speech, mentioned about the Ethiopians with the semi-animal kind of thing. Actually, that picture belongs to Oreti, not the Ethiopians, because Ethiopians were not fought against the Alexander's forces. It was the Oretes who fought, and it was the Oretes which were the main objective to be conquered during this retreat. Then Malana, the Ras Malana or Malana, here again the Oretes and Gedrosian were resided. The western coast of Oreti, it is the limit of the Oreti tribe, and it is also the end of the Indian mainland. From Malana or Buzi top, the country of Gedrosia and country of Ethiopians started. So then the first area or coastal area which Nearchus landed was the Bagisara. It is present day Ormara, and it is the country of Ethiopians. It is very important before going through those annals of the Greeks that the geography of the coastal Makkuran should be taken into consideration before making taking a position about the present location of the areas. Because Ormara comprises of a huge horizontal rock standing before the sea, making a promontory connected with the land by a small strip of land and dividing the sea into eastern coast, eastern bay and western bay. So when the Nearchus arrived at this area, he took his voyage and he went parallel to the promontory, and then sometime he anchored on the west bay or east bay. So the distance as well as the actual anchorage of the Nearchus should be taken seriously, otherwise, because then we get confused that where he anchored, whether it is a small village of the Ormara or it was the present day Ormara. Then come Kolta or Ras Basol. It is a small dry stream bed situated in proximity of the Ormara. Because for procurement of the fresh water, they dug some well over here. Then come Kalima. It is Kalmat or Balara or Kaliba, country of Ethiopians. Here some agriculture activities were noticed by Alexander, suitable place for anchorage, and it is the first time we are noticed that Nearchus was mentioning something about Nosala or Selera, which is present days Aftalar in Baluchi, Astola Island in English, and Satadeep in Indian or Sanskrit. And here he also mentioned something about a Nared, a story of Nared. According to this story, the Ethiopians said, Nearchus, don't go to this island because if you go, you will be in danger. There is a Nared leaves who kill all the people who approached that island and converted them into fish. And according to Greek mythology, the sun god was angry upon that Nareds and told them, leave that island, otherwise I'm going to punish you. Then Nareds requested the sun god, please let me to convert, to convert these men which were I converted into fish to back again into human. Therefore, sun god accepted his request, and then these people re-emerge in the form of the human. According to Ethiopians' belief, these the fish eater or Ethiopians are the descendant of those people who re-emerge in the form in the human form. After Kalama, the second small coastal area was Karbis, which is present day Rumbra or Rungra. Desolate coastal area, local fled whence they saw Greeks. And it is important to mention here that these small coastal towns were where the Nearchus make anchorage was not for the purpose of conquering these small towns, rather than because of the high tide or tidal movement, as well as for procurement of fresh water, as well as food stuff, which is hardly available in this coastal area. Therefore, he was enforced to make anchorage on each and every small coastal area. Another important thing, the areas which were mentioned by Nearchus and then narrated by Aryan are still in use as a coastal town. It means that the geography of these areas, of coastal areas, are so suitable that for 2000 years ago or in present day, they are still still appropriate to be stay over there and then to take their small boats into the sea without any difficulties. Then come Mosarna. It is again Passini. Again, there is a problem of the geographical location because there are two mountains or like rocks penetrating into the sea. One is called Juddi, other one is Zarrain. And the area near the Juddi is due to coral reefs is difficult, still today difficult to be encouraged or used for fishing or for encourage of these boats. The other part, which is called the West Bay of the Passini, is most like a sandy beach and easy to anchor. There is no coral reefs. Therefore, some people say that this Mosarna is actually the Zarrain promontory of the Passini area. Then comes Balamus. It is Ras Shumal Bandhan, and here you can see that 750 stadia, which is almost like 138 kilometer, because I convert one stadia is equal to 183 meter, I believe. Based on that calculation, I calculated those distances, but it is way too much because distance between Mosarna and Balamus in present day is around 40 kilometer, not more than that. Distance for former and later seems to be exaggerated. Here is the place where Nearchus hired a local seaman named as Adricus, which is, according to Greek chronologists, belonged to Gedrusia. And after that, he did not face any difficulties on his later voyages up till the Germania, because the local guide was well acquainted with those small islands as well as those small coastal towns, and as well as the weather was getting better. Remember that when Nearchus left the Patala, it was the monsoon period. It was almost like October. At that time, even nowadays, like a monsoon period in this in our part is last at the end of the August. But during 2,300 years ago, the length of the monsoon was not that which we are now seeing in our part. Then come Barna, Badra, it is present-day Gwadar. Remember that since Malana, we are in Ethiopia's country, all of a sudden a small town came where the Greeks praise that the gardens, and they call them civilized because of the gardens and other manners as well as their trade with the Gedrusia, and the people wearing the garlands and so on. Therefore, based on this information, I believe that, I assume that the local inhabitants of the Badra or Barna were whether Parthian or Persian or Gadrusian, because it is not the Parthian came after the Hellenic period, and they occupied Gwadar, and at the top of the promontory of the Gwadar, the Kohe Batil exists, which is has the similar architecture as we seen in Yemen, according to Besenwal, that the or Piacentini, the architecture of the Kohe Batil's dam is similar to those found in in Yemen, and they are more Parthian type of things or something like that. However, the Parthian came after the death of the Alexander, and then they made a government on Persia along with the Hellenic period. But it is very difficult whether the Gwadar was the people who were residing at the time of the Nearchus voyages were Parthian or Persian or Ethiopiagese. After that, Badra, the next stop was Dendrobosa or Derano Bosa, which is Ras Pishokan. Ras Pishokan, and this is the country of the Ethiopiagese. Here we can see that according to Major Moklar, that there is, actually that was an island. And this island actually was made because of the mud volcanoes or submerged mud volcanoes in the sea. Even like in 2013, when a huge earthquake because of the Arabian plate and then Eurasian plate were interact with each other at the Makran coast, which is called Makran eccentric zone, and that resulted several islands emerged in coastal Makran, and then within the 1 year they were vanished into sea due to water erosion. But this island, in my opinion, was belonged to same period when the promontory of the Ormada, promontory of the Gwadar, and promontory of the Gwatar, as well as Aftalar or Astola Island during geological time emerged. And because promontory of the Gwadar, Ormada, and Gwatar, they are close to the coast and connected with the land by a small isthmus, they are still not deeply eroded compared with that island. It might be possible that it was a small island, and Aftalar once upon a time was a huge. Nowadays it is completely deteriorating due to tidal movements, and maybe possible that within a few hundred years the Aftalar is also going to be again disappear into the sea. Same happened here. And the local informed Major Moklar that Major Moklar wrote that paper in 1875. The local elder told him that 100 years ago they used to go to collect the fodder for their goats and sheep or their animals from that island. It means that at that time it was existed. Therefore, it is possible that Dendrobosa was that island. Then comes Rhombus or Ankara River. Here is the Dharan mountain from the sea. And then eventually Kopas. It is the last area of the Pakistani Makran or the beginning of the Persian Makran, which is known as Jivani or Gwatar, and that the actual location is still confusing. Now, I am talking about the flora. Flora, which Greek chronologists mention in their annals, the first one is Euphorbia caducifolia. The Euphorbia was collected, described as like a shrub which is so thorny that the rabbits were caught once they enter into the huge like thick branches or like reticulated branches, they were arrested, and then it is difficult for them to escape the spine of this deciduous or succulent shrub. Even today, despite the influence of the Prosopis juliflora, we are still see the pure stands of the Euphorbia caducifolia in Sonmiani area. The second one, it is again Sonmiani, the Avicenna marina, the mangroves. For the first time, Greek reported the presence of the trees in brackish water, and when during high tide, they are submerged in the marine water, and once like in the ebb or what you call it, low tide, they look like they are the plants of the land. And the fruit is similar to almond. The only mangroves which has a propagule or similar to almond is Avicenna marina. The third plant, Ziziphus numillaria, in Baluchi we call it pins or konar or bear. It is a wild bear. Remember that during the time when Nearchus took his voyage into coastal Makran, he mentioned some plants with a fragrance, aroma. Ziziphus numillaria is very aromatic, produce aromatic small, tiny floral parts, particularly their sepal or petal, or you may say the other part. During the month of November, October and November, it was the same month when Nearchus reached in this area of the Makkuran. Therefore, it is possible that the aroma or the fragrance came from this plant, because there is none there is no other plant produce fragrance as well as inflorescence during this period. It is one of the reasons why I mentioned that it was the Ziziphus numillaria. The fourth plant is Commiphora whitei. Actually, it is the plant from where the Phoenician collected the gum or myrrh in like lots of ton from the gum of this succulent shrub. It is Commiphora whitei. Then they also saw some scattered bunches of the palm or Phoenix dactylifera. And then the last one is Calotropis procera. According to Greek chronologists, that the spear of the Orites are dipped into a poisonous latex of a local plant, which they consider that is lethal when it injected into the body of their enemy. And the only plant, it is a poisonous plant, and the latex, if inserted into a large quantity into human body, it causes or it creates some problems. And then he Alexander mentioned that he dreamed an antidote, and then he spread this propaganda, and then people were pacified. Say Alexander has some God-gifted knowledge about their secret, therefore they did not fight. It was, in my opinion, Calotropis procera. Then, well, in Indica, Ariel mentioned the well. The Greek were for the first time encountered this huge monster. It was not in the Indus, because this animal, a small river cannot afford, this animal cannot exist in the water. It need a deep sea. It is only, I believe, the Arabian Ocean or Arabian Sea or Persian Gulf where they saw this huge or gigantic animal sprouting the water like a glacier, and then all of a sudden there is a darkness, and then people, sailors of the Nearchus were get scared, and then local tribes say, don't worry, it's just a sea creature, it won't hurt you. Just start chanting and drumming loudly that these animals submerged into the water.
Dr. Baloch, I'm really sorry. I just wanted to give you a sort of 2-minute.
Okay, I will skip the nerd, and then Alexander, here again, the second voyage is the land voyage of the Alexander the Great. He took, and then he pacified several things. It is the map of the Oreti country till Malang. And then country of the Ethiopiagese. Here we can see the reference of the periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Nearchus describe of the Ethiopiagi of the Macron coast, living on the catching of a small common forage fish as well as sardine. Again, another small fish by throw net, fishing craft propelled by the paddles rather than oars, and the flour or meal made from the grinding dried fish. A similar description is also made in Periplus of the Erythraean Sea by a unknown author, which adds that a canoe made from the hollow tree trunk and fish trap were also used. These Ethiopiagese had such plentiful supplies of the fish that they even fed their domestic animal or livestock with fish. It is one of the reasons when the Greeks were caught, slaughtered these sheep and goat, and then they say its meat tastes like fish. Arian narrated that Nearchus observed Ethiopiagese on the coastal Makuran fishing close to the shore with nets, which sounds from their description like beach seines. A seine is a net operating, like there is a net, and then it's supported by a trunk of the palm tree, and again another net comes, like some seines like 2 stadia in length, like 360 meter wide. And sometimes when the huge whale cast away from the seashore because of the disease, and then they come and then rotate on the coastal area, these Ethiopiagese use their boats for making their shelters and so on. And okay, here that's the last one. This is the picture which is published in National Geographic. Here I just want to say one thing. There is a movie called The Air of Living Dangerously by Mel Gibson and Linda Hunt, and there is a Indonesian proverb, water from the moon. Means something you can see but you cannot touch. I think this water which is coming from the element of the Alexander, to me it is water from the moon. And that makes what Alexander is Alexander. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baloch, and for such an insightful presentation, especially your concept of linking the study of geomorphology to the study of place names and the provenance of the cities that we have along our coast today. If we can borrow perhaps 5 minutes or for some quick questions, I'd like to open the floor to questions now. Yes?
Yeah, sorry, the speakers can be over there. Dr. Baloch.
Dr.
Sir, Dr. Hamid, my question is to Dr. Hamid. Sir, in your presentation you mentioned that over here, I'm here, sir. So in your presentation, you mentioned that Alexander and his forces also visited Hanglaj. It's a Hanglaj River. It's a great water path right from up in the mountains of Hanglaj Mata Temple until to the Malir Kund Malir. It's a great water path. And
thank you.
And it's WAPDA also has a plan for the construction of the dam over there. So do you think that after the construction of the dam, there will be sufficient amount of water repository for the economic uplift of that area, because for thousands of years, that is the water path, and definitely, desperately, people need water over there in the Hanglaj River.
Actually, because your topic is dealing with the engineering or modern dates problem, I'm just talking about that at the time when Nearchus arrived at Ingol River, it was the last part of the delta, the mouth of the Indus. There was no mention of any Tirath or any special Hindu shrine at that time. And Hindu shrine, whether it is Satadeep of the Astola or Ingol, in my humble opinion, came once the Seleucus make alliance with the Chandragupta, and then he got this area in Daivari. Therefore, they came under the influence of the Hinduism. Before, there was no mention of any religious Tirath or any worshipping place in this region.
Hanglaj River is, for thousands of years, Hanglaj River is
okay. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut that short. I'm going to take advantage of having the mic and ask a really quick question to all three panelists. What conception of the port on the mouth of the Indus Delta did Alexander and his army have before they actually reached Patala? Because we've heard sort of references to him setting the port up and opening up trade in the Indian Ocean, but we have some references to trade between the Indus civilization and Mesopotamia. So what kind of information would we have had before arriving there and setting the port up?
Does this work? If I could answer, if I understood you correctly, there is often an important mistranslation in Arrian's history. Nearchus says it was not that Alexander did not know what lay ahead. He knew it was difficult. I believe his plan was to march and stay along the coastline and be supplied by Nearchus from the sea. Hence the 4 months of supplies they had prepared for the fleet to carry at Patala. Nearchus is delayed by the monsoon winds. Alexander marches in, expecting the fleet to come. No fleet. Disaster. So he must turn inland and survive as best he can. So he knew it was very difficult. He had a logistic plan, and he is defeated by the weather. It is not the case that he just marched into the desert with no idea of a plan or the difficulty. I think it is correct. May I ask Abdul Hamid, his wonderful paper, a question? We are told there was a plant that could cure the bite of the snake and the problem for Ptolemy. Botanists say it is a nerium. Do you have an idea?
Yes. If it is nerium, then we have a wild species of nerium oleander all in our dry stream beds, including Ingol, Basol, Shadikor, and Dasht. Yes, but I'm not so sure about that whether the latex, because it is also a poisonous plant, absolute poisonous, more poisonous compared with the Calotropis procera. But if it is, then it is nerium oleander. Yes, we have the natural stands of the nerium oleander in dry stream beds.
Thank you. I'm sorry to ask a question.
No, thank you very much. And I think we can maybe continue this discussion over lunch, unless there are any other burning questions. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for your wonderful presentations, and thank you to the audience for paying rapt attention. Thank you.